We're going to call the meeting to order. Select Board meeting Monday, February 24th. Michelle Pryor, joined by Vice Chair John Fallon, members Anthea Brady, Bill McGonigal, Mike Betancourt, and Town Manager Beth Rudolph. I think we'll start with donations. We'll do the Town Manager's report, and then we'll move through the agenda.
Well,
We have no donations.
Things are awful tight around here. There's no donations.
Beth, I'll turn it over to you. I realize we have no motions. Pass the hat like you're an umpire.
Telephone?
I have one appointment this evening. We're postponing the lieutenant appointment. So I have, in accordance with Section 4-2B of the Town Charter and in accordance with the rules and regulations of the Department of Personal Administration, Civil Service, and as permitted by Chapter 708 of the Acts of 1941 as amended, I have the following promotional appointment in the Fire Department of James Whitaker to Captain, and I requested the board vote to waive the 15-day appointment period.
All right, I move that we waive the 15-day waiting period for the fire department promotion of James Whitaker from lieutenant to captain. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So just a few other updates on things that are not otherwise on the agenda. A couple kind of scheduling informational pieces. So as we all know, the warrant closes on March 14th for the spring town meeting. At your next meeting on March 10th, the board will be voting the warrant articles that you will be sponsoring. The town election is then scheduled for March 22nd. And then we'll be working on the motions for town meeting after that, and the board will be signing the spring town meeting warrant on April 7th, and then spring town meeting starts on Monday, April 28th. A couple other updates. As the board approved a few meetings ago, the outdoor dining applications are currently available from the town manager's office, and they are due this Friday at noon, and we'll be scheduling a review of those applications at a future board meeting. We have also issued the lease for the RFP for the lease of town-owned land behind 955 Main Street, and that lease is currently available from the town manager's office. Proposals are due on March 17th. Included in the packet is an update from our facilities director, Pete Lawson, on the Mystic Heat project that's happening. So according to Mr. Lawson, the installation of the heat pump portion of the project is currently on track for completion at the end of April. We are still, as we expected, waiting for Eversource for information on delivery of the transformer, but the equipment will be installed and ready to go once that transformer has been received. We're also separately, as we've discussed over the past few months, we had worked with Weston and Sampson to look at the ways that we could improve the steam heat delivery to other portions of the building, and so they are wrapping up that design work right now, and we hope to be able to do that work as a change order with our existing contractor. And then I think the last piece of good news is, according to Mr. Lawson, we are expecting to get about $120,000 in rebates from National Grid for the project. So I think it's all good news on that project there.
And we haven't had any issues with heat there because it's been super cold for an extended period of time, and it's been okay, even though I think they've been over.
I know there was a recent steam pipe issue that they were addressing, so I think there's been certainly some maintenance issues that our DPW staff has been able to keep up with, but I think everybody knowing this project is coming forward and will be completed in time for the next heating season, hopefully. I think everybody feels.
And has Eversource given us any indication of when that transformer might arrive?
I don't have any information on that. I know Meg White in the engineering department has been kind of hounding them about that. Obviously, we're all interested in that critical piece. But
DPW did a good job coordinating with the, let's say, tenants of the building. Mm-hmm. They got a lot of the asbestos-involved work done this past week when the use was low and the Kids Corner program was on field trips every day, and it was easy to shift the kids around. So in terms of having minimal impact, they're really being cognizant of what's going on.
Other piece of good news is we recently received information from EOHLC that they completed their review of our application for the MBTA overlay district, and that Winchester is in compliance with Section 3A. So that certainly follows the approval at town meeting a few town meetings ago, and certainly the hard work of the planning board and the town planner to move that forward.
Congratulations, Planning Board Vice Chair. and to your peers.
And then finally, just a reminder that transfer station permits are on sale in the clerk's office or online. Permits must be purchased by March 1st. You must have a valid permit to be able to enter the transfer station after that period. And also, the town clerk is currently licensing dogs for the 2025 calendar year. And then finally, I just wanted to mention, shout out to our sustainability director, Ken Pruitt, who's here, that there's the Repair Cafe is happening Saturday, March 8th from 9 a.m. to noon at the First Congregational Church. Residents can bring in small appliances or other items that need repair, and folks there will be happy to help you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to do the public hearing for vehicle hire. Okay. Great.
Beth wants to go through that while we have a minute. Elections.
Yep.
Reminder.
By the way,
You can make the
I
reminder.
found her. She was in there. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Are going to get to you in a minute.
So, public service announcement,
Thank
right?
you.
A PSA
Thank you, John.
about voting on Saturday, March 22nd at high school. Hours,
Yes.
Beth, are? Is.
7 a.m. to 8 p.m.?
to 8 p.m. Sounds
right.
about right.
Yes. Yes.
And you can vote early.
And you can vote early. Yes. So for anyone who's here for public comment, I'm going to take a public comment after we do this license. And then we'll move through the rest of the agenda. But first thing is, we have a vehicle for hire license for transportation livery. Which one of you is Mr. Alpayden?
Yeah,
Close.
My name is Murat Alpaydan.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Alpayden, okay. So we have your application. We have, police chief did background check. Everything looks to be in order. And maybe if you want to talk about, hours of operation or how you intend to run the business or anything else, if you've done this before as a vehicle for hire. So if you could just give us a little background, and that would be helpful.
First of all, my English not very good, so sorry about that. And then my cousin maybe help me.
Hi, my name is Yildirim Ozdemir. I'm Murat's cousin and counsel here
Okay.
today. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
Due to
O soruyor, hangi saatler çalışacaksınız?
gün içerisinde 9 a.m. 5 p.m.
He states that he'll work around 9 to 5 p.m. And sorry, what were the other questions?
So have you done this before? And for how many years or where?
Okay. Sen önceden yaptın mı ve kaç yıl yaptın?
Yeah, bir yıl Uber, Lyft tecrübem var.
Yeah, he has a 1-year experience working with Uber and Lyft
1 year?
with his
Okay.
person, with his car.
Bazı komşularımı hastaneden eve, havaalanından eve taşıma yapıyordum. Daha sonra bu işi daha profesyonel yapmak için lisans başvurusunda bulunmak istedim.
And he's driven friends and family to like hospitals and to the airport before, so he was looking to make this more of a professional business because he enjoys it.
Okay. And is there anything else he wants to tell us? He can. I think those are our questions.
okay.
But if there's anything more, you can go ahead.
Başka bir şey söylemek istiyor musun?
Teşekkür ederim. Fırsatı verdiğiniz için.
He wants to say thank you to everyone for the opportunity as well.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? Everything certainly is in order. I know that from all the background that we did on our side. So no other questions. We can take a motion.
Just how do people access your service? Is it obviously it's with the phone, but is it how are you going to develop your clients?
Müşterileri nasıl alacaksın? Mesela onlar nerede seni tanışacaksın ve şeyler konacaksın?
Kartım var, iş kartım. Onu dağıtıyorum zaten. Halihazırda şu anda müşterilerim var. Onların tavsiyeleriyle daha müşteri çoğalıyor.
He says he has a business card and that he's been meeting people and he's ready to kind of take the next step with his business, and that the people that he's given his card to, they're going to give his card to their friends, and then hopefully build a network through like word of mouth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And at this time, it's one car, right? So we're not anticipating a fleet of cars.
Yeah, just one.
One, okay.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right,
No, I move that the Select Board approve the vehicle for hire license transportation livery for Murat Alapiden LLC.
Second.
Yeah, correct.
all those in favor?
Do we need to ask for comments?
Thank you. It is a public hearing. Any questions from the audience? Thank you, Anthea. Seeing none, or at least raise your hand. Okay. Now we can take our vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Good luck.
And we can
Thank you
close
so
the
much.
public hearing, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming in and your patience.
Thank you so much.
Next up, we'll take public comment. We were slightly out of order, so then we'll move into our business agenda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you have a great night. Thank you.
If anybody's here for public comment, okay, I see one hand. If you can come on up. And I think you know the drill. Name and where you live, and 3 minutes. And
Okay, I don't.
if I have to
can-
start a timer, I will.
Don't start a timer.
Well, if I see you scrolling a lot on your phone, I might have to.
Pamela Court, Precinct 5, town meeting member as well. First, I want to say thank you to all of you for what you do in the community. Even when I vociferously disagree with you, I really still deeply appreciate your service. And in particular, more so now than ever, because the past few years have been more challenging than ever for local volunteer-based municipalities. The convergence of long-term deficits and maintenance deferrals, particularly, but also through excessively lean staffing from Proposition 2.5, which is now exacerbated by sharp increases in inflation and sharper still in the construction and healthcare sectors. The pandemic, from which we're still recovering. A confluence of capital, environmental, programmatic, and staffing, the schools in particular, but town hall as well. Those needs are already at what's a tipping point. A lot of very tough decisions are going to need to be made. I commend this board for the difficult discussions that you've been having about developing the town budget this year around this table. In particular, at your last meeting, I appreciated a number of statements that were made by certain board members. Mike, your clear assertion clarified that the school committee budget is still in development by the school committee because that's their responsibility. And given the number of those speaking on the school budget during public comment, it was an important clarification to be made, and it was made tactfully. John, your statement acknowledging the realities of our limited resources stated well the need to take a deep dive into how we can appropriately determine priorities based on the community, the entire community. And Michelle, your moderation of this board has been nothing short of excellent, especially given the chaos that dominated this process during the last 2 years. Your acknowledgement and advocacy for a thoughtful process that includes all stakeholders through public outreach will hopefully lead to an outcome which balances the diverse situations of our residents. Also, at the last meeting, the word disappointed was used by an appointed official when discussing your hard work. The word inefficient was levied at town hall. Let me say that those descriptors were harsh and inaccurate. This community is understaffed by both paid and volunteer officials across town hall and the schools. And in fact, this efficiency is so counterproductive that we've become woefully inefficient because too many people are trying to do the jobs of more than one person, and it's not sustainable. It's wholly inappropriate that we had 2 elected volunteer officials doing the job of an unfilled position of town planner. What they did was remarkable. It was also unfair, and unfortunately not enough to do more than keep things from collapsing. I'm sad at the lost opportunities to do better planning, and this extends to other departments as well. Many boards are already overburdened. Taking on issues that other bodies are supposed to be responsible for becomes actively counterproductive, as it not only lessens the time you volunteers have to spend on your mandated mission, but also in damaged relationship, further damage through poor communication and coordination. And did I say you guys are overburdened? Because boundaries, when they've routinely been crossed, given the current environment, just make more work for everybody, and you already have so much to do. You have so many things that are in such great need of your attention. I don't envy the hard work ahead of you. So I thank you again, and I just want to please say, don't let this clutter distract you from your purpose, because the discussions that you've been having have been incredibly productive, and I would love to continue watching those productive conversations, because it's going to be hard. On another note, with regard to Converse, which is 10 Converse Place, which is on your agenda, I'm going to ask that you guys please remember what our master plan has emphasized is important to this community: natural spaces, the character of the town, resources, housing, traffic, and also maintaining a diverse populace of all ages, economic status, and cultures. A huge building that adds very little to the SHI, yet would dominate the skyline and encroach close to the Aberjona, is not something to consider without doing a lot more public outreach. And as for land swaps or any kind of mitigation, we've failed in the past when we've done that to protect those areas. The outcome wasn't what was intended, and we need to consider those kinds of decisions extremely carefully before a mistake is made that can't be reversed. So I do ask you to consider and remember that, and to respect, in particular, some of the opinions that have been given by other committees, in particular the Conservation Commission. Again, I want to thank you for your time, your efforts, and for patiently listening to my comments tonight, and for the hard work that you're doing and will continue to do.
Thank you, Ms. Court.
Thank you.
You ran about 4.5 minutes, but we'll just let that slide because you had 2 comments. Appreciate it.
From her next public comment.
Maybe. We'll pass it on to town meeting. We'll take Claude back then. Okay. And nobody else here for public comment. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, next up, Ms. Bauer, if you'd like to come up to the table. It's we're going to do the appointment for Disability Access Commission.
Hello.
And we have your application. Thank you for that. We have your both statement of interest as well as your volunteer application. And I know it's an opportunity you've been tracking, you've been engaged with both on a volunteer basis, also in your professional and school journey. It's an area of interest. So if you'd like to maybe tell us more about your interests and qualifications, it's your chance to maybe elaborate on what we already have in your packet.
Yeah. Apologies about the bit of a rocky start here, getting started in the right part of the building.
You made it. That's all that matters.
Made it. We're here.
Yes.
So one thing that I'm really, really passionate about and I really, really care about, the disabled community means a lot to me. It really means a lot to me in a lot of different ways. I have a lot of passion because, particularly, not only because of my own experience, I mean, it's kind of, it's the obvious thing, but also there are a lot of family interests that really, really kind of guide my time. And so I really, really care about the disabled community in the ways of my dad is a cancer survivor. He nearly died many, many times, and so that was a big kind of part that really impacted a lot of my time growing up. But my mom also has a big hearing impairment, which is, I think, a disability that doesn't get a lot of recognition within a the community in terms of what we can do to help and give more access in terms of that type of thing. And so sorry. I'm getting going. So a little bit about my qualifications. I got my degree in communication, which is something that I did because I am not very good at it, as you can tell. Doing my best. It is something that I'm really passionate about, and that I really wish that I could do better to just continue with my communication and just do better. But I I got my degree in communication. I got my minor in leadership and higher education in community settings because it's really important to me that the area that I live in, I'm able to help people with accessibility and make things a more accessible area. Because disability is one of the most the best way to describe, I think, probably is just it's a very under-focused, underutilized, it's a very important aspect that I think doesn't get recognized as much as it really needs to be. And so I would like to work on trying to see how I can help and make a difference in the community and see about making things more accessible for people. Because I think that it's really important, and disability is a huge sorry. Apologies. Yeah, it's just really it's really important. One of the things that I really care about as well is I think that age is a big thing that's really important when it comes to accessibility and accessibility topics. I am a volunteer at the Jenks Center. I volunteer weekly there, and I really enjoy my time there and working with the people there in the ways that I can. And I would just like to be able to expand that work, and yeah.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody have questions? I will go last.
No, I just want to thank you for your commitment, passion. Great applications. Just spoke to a lot of what you said, and we'd be fortunate to have you. So thank you for applying.
Yeah, I'll echo what John said. Thank you very much. It's important for us to be able to see through a lens that we don't otherwise always see, and whether it be for a parking space or a playground or a school building, it's your voice is really important. So thank you so much for being willing to serve. So I look forward to working with you.
Also, thank you for applying. You did a great job presenting. So your communications major, has done a great job in preparing you for that. And I appreciate your interest in this role. And I also really enjoyed reading your application and seeing your resume and the background and the research that you've done in your undergrad degree. It's really, probably really impactful in a variety of different directions.
Yeah. I'll commend you on getting involved so early after college. We need more voices like yours coming forward just with your experience and just being at your point in life. And so if you have any friends who want to get involved, please encourage them. If you want to get involved in the planning board, I think we need a new person on the planning board. That's going to have impact on disability access around town. But I will ask you a question. This past fall, we were able to provide funding through our ARPA community program for some matting or platforms that allow access across grass and other areas. It was a very small investment, and it was the sort of thing that I never thought about would be very important to people who might not be able to just walk across a lawn. So right now, can you just give us like one or two things that you think we could do? No worry about the price tag, to make access across this town better for people.
Yeah, there are a few things that I think about. One big thing that I think can make a huge difference that is not something that a lot of people think about in particular is getting there are a lot of handicap parking spots. There are not a lot of handicap parking spots that have ramp access, and the ones that are there that have wide enough spaces are frequently blocked. They're frequently parked in. There are a lot of things like that can be issues. So if there are things that we can do about that, then that would be something that would be really, really appreciated. Other things, I think that probably one of the biggest access issues that when it comes to physical access, it's the snow. The snow, yeah, I can't go anywhere. I don't go anywhere. Like, if I'm sure, if you know, you might have seen me around town at certain times, and if you have seen me around town, you probably have not seen me around town in the winter, because I can't do it. I can't get around in the snow. I can't get around. I can't. There's no, like, the ramp access is really, really difficult, and there are also a lot of issues with people who, for example, in downtown, who just park over the
Crosswalk?
the crosswalks, and there's just I don't know what to do about it. It's people aren't embarrassed if I ask them to move, and people don't want to move, and they won't sometimes, and it's really, really difficult. It makes me feel like I'm not valued, and I'm not, like, people just don't care. People don't think about it, and they don't want to think about it, and that can just be really, really difficult in town. Yeah.
Congratulations on taking the first step on getting those problems fixed and bringing them to our attention. So, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for having ideas. And you never know what Mr. McGonigal is going to ask you, so.
It's true.
Glad you hadn't answered. It was a great one. I just wanted to basically echo my peers. And it's not every day that we have applicants whose passion, aligns with, passion, life experience, and volunteer opportunity. And when we can sort of, achieve that and put you into a role that you want to have that is so meaningful to you, I think it's great. We don't always get such great alignment. So thank you for throwing your hat in. And I think we're good to go.
I move that the Select Board appoint Ari Bauer as an alternate member of the Disability Access Commission, term to expire August 31st, 2027.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations. And thanks for doing great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. She's free to go if she wishes. We can have the folks from 10 Conference Place come on up, and we will hear, I think, a presentation, and then we will, if there's any public comment, we'll invite that after we hear the presentation. And can you try to actually see if you can page down on the keyboard and see if that'll move your slides? I'm not sure who's got the control these days. I don't see a mouse for you. So, yeah, that's doing something.
I have it.
Excellent. All right, so once Patty comes back in, we'll go ahead and get started. But it looks like you can navigate, so that's good.
And before we get started,
We'll
we
do
have
quick
some...
intros. Okay.
Sure, we'll do that. We have some hard copies of this. Is it helpful?
Happy to
hand?
have you pass that out.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you could put one on that desk, that'd be great. Thank you. Don't hit anybody in the head, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. If you could do quick introductions.
Sure.
And just for your, we are the 5 select board members, and this is the town manager, Beth Rudolph, and our names are in front of us. So we're easy, but if you could
Makes
introduce
it
yourselves, that'd be great.
Well, thank you for having us this evening. I'm Paul Nubani from Urban Spaces, the proponent for 10 Converse.
And David Notter from Urban Spaces as well.
And I'm Larry Beals. I'm with Beals Associates, and I've been involved with the project for a while. And we've put together this slide deck. And we don't want to take a lot of your time. I could speak for 3 or 4 weeks about this project if that were helpful.
Not here.
Okay, good. You won't have to turn on your timer either. But
I'm ready.
what's intended with this is just to walk you through what the request is and why we're making the request, if that's helpful. So for orientation, this is the site, the tall building, town hall's on the right, tall building in the center is 10 Converse Place. And generally, the property line runs about 25 or 30 feet off the edge of the pond, up to Mount Vernon Street, along Mount Vernon Street, and then back down Converse Place. So what brings us here is DEP has determined that Mill Pond is actually a river, has riverine characteristics, and because of that, it puts us into the Rivers Protection Act. And within the Rivers Protection Act, you have to mitigate for any undisturbed areas within that protected area. So there's purpose to the colors on this. The gray color is the disturbed area, the building, the parking, and DEP views that as being disturbed, and therefore it doesn't have to be mitigated. The green area is the existing turf lawn. We've discussed it with DEP, and the conclusion has been that that is undisturbed riverfront area, so it has to be mitigated. And then also the landscape beds, the mulch beds are shown in brown, and DEP's determination is that is undisturbed riverfront area as well. So from that we develop a couple of numbers, but based on this slide, total site is 25,901 square feet, a little over half an acre. And the degraded area, the disturbed area, is 15,787 square feet. And all those numbers are written down on the bottom of this drawing. And the undisturbed area, the landscape beds comprise about 1,700 square feet, and the turf lawn is another 8,300 square feet. So of the 25,000, 15,787 is degraded, and 10,114 is undisturbed riverfront area. So for the proposed development, we've used the same color code. The gray areas are the building and paved surfaces, and the green is area that is going to be open and landscaped and vegetated. So the way the regulations work is that we are required to restore 10,114 square feet, which is the undisturbed area. So, and these aren't my regulations, these are the DEP regulations. So under the Rivers Protection Act, if you can restore riverfront on site, you do it at a ratio of 1:1. So if you develop undeveloped or undisturbed riverfront area, a square foot of it, you have to replace it with a square foot, and you get a 1:1 credit. They also permit off-site mitigation, and that's really what we're here to talk about tonight. And if you are going to mitigate by using off-site land, it has to be done at a ratio of 2:1. So that column shows that on our site, we can mitigate 3,950 square feet at a ratio of 1:1. If we go off-site, we need to mitigate 12,328, because at that 2:1 ratio, you divide it in half, it gives us 6,164, and if you add those two numbers together, it puts us up to the 10,114. I hope that's clear, and I can answer any questions on it, but
The math works for me.
Good.
But if you could just, maybe for my benefit, maybe for some others in the room, what does mitigation mean? The DEP requires mitigation. What does that mean?
So it means a lot of things, but in the context of this, it would involve restoration of other areas, important ecological areas adjacent to the river. So if you had a parking lot that went right down to the river, taking out that pavement would be deemed to be appropriate mitigation, as long as you replant it with native plants and ground cover and have a palette of plants that are acceptable to DEP. Make sense?
So when you go along the riverbank and you do mitigation, what does that consist of?
Could I walk you through a couple of slides to illustrate this?
But yes, please.
So it's really in towns like Winchester and eastern Massachusetts, there are a lot of lands directly adjacent to rivers and wetlands that have been disturbed. This site has been developed since the 1600s.
Yep.
And so, it's just, if you look around Mill Pond, there's a lot of granite block and there's a lot of unnatural stuff. So it's basically taking what's there and trying to add value to it by populating it with native plant species that have wildlife value, nesting areas, food areas, and stabilizing that embankment so it doesn't erode into the pond. A poor form of stabilization, which actually happens out there now, is a lot of that bank is mulched. And a lot, it rains, it washes into the pond, it gets remulched, it washes into the pond. So our plan would be to stop that. Use the plants, stabilize it. The plants provide the function of stabilization. It also can enhance the wildlife value. So you think about a river. What would you want to have next to a natural river? Solid plant materials and high value habitat. So, and DEP has said that they would prefer to have mitigation in the area that we're proposing the project, as opposed to going upstream or downstream. And so we really focused on Mill Pond. And if I can walk you around Mill Pond, the developer would really like to enhance the area shown up there as, I don't suppose I have a cursor to point with this, but it's okay. It's the highest number there with the leader that goes down to the embankment next to our building. It's called Area 1, and we've recently been around that area. Oh, thank you.
Hey, look at that.
Wow. Patty does everything.
She does.
So this terminates right down by the Center Falls dams, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with this embankment. And we were just out there recently and took some photographs that I'll share. But this area is approximately 10,150 square feet. And so that's getting us close to our total. We need to get more, so we looked at this area, which is the far side of the pond. There's a lot more foot traffic on that because it's level. And then we went around Sandy's Island, and in our view, this embankment could use some work, as well as this area directly adjacent to Town Hall. Going up in scale, we've labeled these, and I've got bigger photos, but the upper left-hand corner is labeled as 1B, and that's, you can see the Main Street Bridge in the background, and so that's directly adjacent to the site. 1A is the area opposite Town Hall, and then number 3 is the far side of the pond, and number 2 is also far side of the pond. So going up in image, on the left-hand side, our building is on the right-hand side of that photograph. So China Sky is in the background of that. And so that is an embankment that we're proposing to revegetate and stabilize. And so both of these views adjacent to 10 Converse Place are directly adjacent. And it's somewhat mutually beneficial because it's not particularly attractive right now. And to the extent that we can enhance the ecological value of that and the aesthetic value, I think it's well worth the effort. This is the view of the area adjacent to Town Hall. And these areas are really susceptible to invasive plants. They float down the river and wash up on the embankment. They're brought in by birds and animals. And it's a constant diligence to get the invasive plants out of there. And then On the right-hand side, it's the view adjacent to Mystic Valley Parkway. And I think the plan there has to be a little bit different because there's a lot of foot traffic through there. And you can see it, and when we were out here, I think there's a lot of middle school kids that probably walk down that path. So, you know, those activities are in conflict with reestablishing a natural environment. And Beth at one point had mentioned street trees as something that would be good for the town. So maybe this is an area where it's more applicable to do street trees because they wouldn't, you know, you can't walk over a street tree. It's more durable. So what we're here tonight is to run this idea by you, and ultimately what we will need, if the board is so inclined, is a letter from the board, and Jay can advise you on this better than I, stating that the applicant has your permission to work on town-owned land. We'd have to identify the parcels and identify the work. So this is a plan that we put together when we were involved in the local permit process that shows the landscaping on the site and proposed landscaping off of the site. These would be refined with more detail and more specificity so that presumably at some point the town manager, the town engineer, somebody will want to see a set of plans and then review it and approve it and then verify that the work was actually done. So I think that's our last slide. You know, in my interest to be brief, which I wasn't, I may have left some. Okay, I may have left out some things, or I could be happy to answer any questions.
First, I think before we go to questions for us, does anybody from the public wish to make public comment? And if you do, please approach the table and maybe grab your own chair. Come on up. Yep. Anybody else other than Mr. Miller? Nope. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm David Miller, Chair of the Conservation Commission, and I was Chair of the Conservation Commission the first time, along with Zeke, who switched in the middle, of the commission when the application for 10 Converse Place first came through. So I'd like to read a few comments, if you bear with me. The permit application for the 10 Converse Place building was denied by the Winchester Conservation Commission under the Wetlands Protection Act and under the town's wetlands bylaw. So those two decisions were based on distinct and independent reasons. The denial under the town bylaw has been appealed in state land court and is currently stayed. Should that go forward, the commission is confident the denial will be upheld. Such an outcome could serve as important case law in the use of aesthetic criteria in decisions by conservation commissions. Our denial under the Wetlands Protection Act is the relevant decision to tonight's discussion. This decision has been under appeal at the Department of Environmental Protection for well over 18 months, that delay resulting from the original applicants failing to provide actionable responses to several pointed DEP information requests. As of this evening, this lack of response by the applicants remains the case. Very briefly, the proposed building is fully within the riverfront, and that is a legally defined term covering all of the land within 200 feet of the riverbank. To build within the riverfront, certain performance parameters must be met. The core concept of these is that the riverfront must be left in a better state in its role as riverfront than before the project started. The WPA describes the performance parameters. Actual numbers and measurements are required to meet the parameters that must be met to satisfy this determination of better. The Winchester Conservation Commission determined the proposed building did not meet these performance parameters. We were supported, and it looks like the same building as what's being proposed now, by the way. We were supported in our decision-making process in several ways by the DEP. Further, our DEP submitted denial document was prepared by then Town Council, who attended many of the actual proceedings. There are multiple reasons for the denial, but the central one here is insufficient mitigation of the building's impact on the riverfront, which has been a core point of Mr. Beal's presentation. The building's numbers did not meet performance parameters that would leave the riverfront in a better state. The proposed building was too big for the space. And so, as we hear this evening, they are in search of additional space to assist in achieving that better state. They now need to accrete additional land, that is town's public land, to refile the permit application for this building. It is a privately owned and financed building that requires access to public land to be permittable. And I note this is legally categorized public land, as I will comment in a moment. Should an accommodation be reached between the Select Board and the applicants, any proposed work taking place on that land would be in a resource area, that is the riverfront, and a notice of intent filing under the Wetlands Protection Act would be required. It is most likely that the Winchester Conservation Commission will review that NOI. We note no less than two important elements of this review. One, under the assumption the NOI were approved, the Commission would include as a legally required continuing condition that the land, that is the restored shoreline, be perpetually maintained in its restored state. This requirement would likely need to be captured in any documentation between the town and the applicants. But before that NOI gets submitted and is in front of the Commission or any other body, the second item, the disposition of this land, given that it is Article 97 land, and it is Article 97 land, must be dealt with. Article 97 of the state's constitution addresses the preservation of open space in the Commonwealth. The public land area around Mill Pond is parkland and is still covered by Article 97. Parenthetically, by the way, this is true of the land around Judkins Pond as well. It is our understanding, based on recent conversations, that the state's required legal process to change the status of this land from its purely public status to one encumbered with a relationship with a business entity is complex and requires filings and approvals at the state level. I urge the board to seek clarity on this before initiating this potentially complex effort that would include town boards, commissions, and multiple state agencies.
Thank you.
Do you want his comments for the record? No.
Yeah, David, could you give, if you're willing, could you leave your comments for the record? Or email them, that's fine too. I always want to invite our town council up, maybe, a couple of questions for you. But not, I think the longer question, Jay, is, what a license agreement might need to be. But could you also opine on, we've heard Rivers Protection Act, we've heard Wetlands Protection Act, and we have Article 97 land. Which of those things are particularly germane to this parcel before we get into mitigation, right?
Well, I think there's that and there's some other issues. So first of all, David's correct that there would have to be additional permitting over there. So I don't have no position on how that comes out, but obviously they have jurisdiction under both the State Wetlands Protection Act and
They being
the Commission.
Concom?
Yes, and the local bylaw. Now, the SOC could assume certain authority and issue certain conditions, but in terms of the actual work on a site that wasn't part of the original notice of intent, that would likely have to be handled locally. As to the Article 97 stuff, it does get a little complicated. It depends on the nature of the work a little bit. Some of that could be consistent with Article 97, but what would be tied in with Article 97, perhaps at the very least, is issues regarding disposition of land, which is a different matter altogether. Now, I don't know enough yet as to exactly what they're doing or what the underlying restrictions or status of the property is vis-a-vis Article 97, but it's something we'd have to look at. I am of the position, however, that given what DEP has said about this, is that a mere license or a letter saying go ahead and do this is not going to be sufficient. That's not how this works. If there's a condition that will last perpetually or for as long as DEP suggests it wants to, and they've suggested perpetuity, it doesn't have to be a deed restriction per se in the kind of formal sense of it, because per the cases and per kind of common sense, a perpetual condition of a land use permit is a perpetual restriction, even if it's not a perpetual restriction under the restriction statute, which is Chapter 184. The cases, two cases in particular, have said that they are essentially perpetual restrictions under kind of more of a common law sense of it. And all permitting land use boards can do that. So if they did that,
Jay, so we're encumbering public land for private use, bottom line?
well, it's not quite that. That's another potential issue, but I think we could probably resolve what would be kind of an anti-aid amendment issue through the public benefits you get from cleaning up the particular land. The concern here is that they need the use of this. It has to be kind of, the use of it has to be essentially conveyed in some way, shape, or form. A mere license to do this work that has long-lasting vitality and durability would have to be done one of two ways. We would either have to convey an easement for that because it has to be durable. Licenses, hey, come on, do this work, and then when you're done, you're done. We've just talked about licenses a little bit today, and then they're temporary in nature. If we're doing something like, hey, here's this use of land, and by the way, it always has to be this use of land, the durability of that kind of conveyance or that kind of permission requires an easement or an outright conveyance. Now, there's another way potentially to do that, but there would be us as a permitting entity where we would ask for the permits to do it. We would be an applicant, so we're not conveying anything to anyone. In that event, what happens is there's a perpetual restriction against our land through a condition imposed by DEP, and we would have to be comfortable that this is forever. So whether we give it to someone else, which would be a town meeting event, because it would be an easement, or we jump into the fray as an applicant, which I don't think has been suggested, I'm not sure the board would be comfortable with it, we'd be giving up the use of that land perpetually for whatever else. Now, that's a policy question, but that's kind of the two ways at it to get where they want to go. I take no position on whether this is a desired outcome or not. It might be great, it might not be great, but whether or not to divest yourself with any other use of that land in perpetuity is something that you'll have to wrestle with. And if you're not going to jump in as an applicant, then we're going to need some town meeting authority here.
And then in these cases, does the applicant post a performance bond for perpetuity, almost like an evergreen performance bond? Because we don't want to end up having to...
It's on our property, so I haven't seen what the restriction would be.
Yep.
But yeah, it would potentially be our obligation moving forward unless there was some kind of annuity or so to speak in some way, shape, or form on that. Yeah, there is an ongoing obligation is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to get you off again there.
No, you didn't. I thought that was helpful. I'm going to hold some questions, but other questions for either. Jay, is there more that you want to share with us as the board before we start asking questions?
No, I think that's the whole of it. I mean, some of the information, and thank you for sending that, Larry, we just got today in terms of what DEP's expectations would be here. That was a question we've had for a while, so we understand that a little bit better. I looked at it quickly today, right after I rolled into town, talked to Beth about it a little, and here we are.
Okay. I do have a question, but I want to wait, so go ahead, Anthea.
I mean, what John sort of just raised to you, Jay, is this land that we would want to sort of convey indefinitely. It's kind of a weird shape, but it does amount to a lot of land, and it is, alongside our bike path, which is DCR.
The bike path is on town land.
It's town.
It's aside from a small, we can see actually that corner, which we have an easement from the 10 Commerce property for.
Right here. That corner.
Yep. But it's also, we have the herring run there on the opposite corner. People are out taking us where the night herons kind of come in, and not only are they in that land, they walk across our crosswalks and things. If you're at the
there's also town storm drains and bridge abutments and other town infrastructure in that kind of pond side of the.
Yeah, I mean, that also makes it seem like that would be a very complicated agreement of what is done with this land and how it's accessed for town storm drains and things like that. So I think, I mean, that is one of the biggest questions for me. And the other is just probably also like procedural with this, but there's a state and land court. So, you know, is somehow the process that we need to approve this before things move forward, or what's really the timeline with this work? And then just in terms of, you know, I don't know all that much at all about native and non-native plants, but, you know, what's currently there right now are those, and what's the sort of proportion of what is native, what is not, how we're changing that, you know, impact things like the sort of aforementioned wildlife. So, you know, as you were talking about the approach, I'm starting to like go into the details, but the biggest question for me is what's the process and what's this actual like long-term, is this land that the town would want to essentially, you know, give up our access to.
I mean, setting aside the Article 97 issue,
Right, because we don't have enough details
Right.
on that yet.
but it wouldn't have to be a conveyance, right? It could just be an easement, a permanent easement that town meeting.
But then we would have to see, to Anthea's point, if we have to reserve some easements for things that already exist over there, we would need some determinations and dialogue with DEP and others as to whether or not those reservations would be compatible. I don't know what they are, the extent of them, but that would be a whole other set of discussions.
I guess just one other question if the town had a say in the land that's used, and I know it's kind of like it should be sort of adjacent, I mean, is this the land? Is this, I know on the other side of Main Street, we were doing work to install those like grids on top of the riverbank, sort of to prevent erosion and to keep it. So the question would be, you know, if this is something that at some point needs to move forward with essentially taking like 12,000 square feet of town land, should we have more say in what's the most appropriate space?
I don't know what DEP's stance is on the geographic location of the mitigation space of the project.
So, of course you do. That's why we're here, is to seek your opinion on the best way to proceed. DEP, as a principle, would like us to focus on Mill Pond. But, you know, a river is a constant flowing, so if you do mitigation upstream or downstream, it's still benefiting the same river system. So DEP has not said we absolutely have to stay within the confines of Mill Pond. If the town has other priorities, we can certainly consider those.
I might also add that, so just going back up to sort of the 30,000 feet from our perspective, which is simply that our intention is to improve the land in the area. When I get a little concerned about the legal terms, which I'm sure absolutely correct, but about conveyancing and taking and using, this is really meant to be for the benefit of the town. This really isn't for our benefit, insofar as the outcome is supposed to be improving the land along the riverfront. Obviously, we need it to do mitigation on our land in order for the proposal to move forward. But in the sense that this work is supposed to be a good outcome for the town, that is our intention, you know. And so however it gets, we don't want to own it, we don't want to do anything but do, you know, the right thing by improving it. So whatever is the path of least resistance to do so, we're all for. We don't want to control any of this land.
Yeah, I think the intent is summarized. There's an Aberjona initiative, which has been intended to improve that. So I've gone back, and there's actually a YouTube video on the town's Conservation Commission website, which I looked at to refresh my memory. I thought the concluding remark is excellent, and it conveys what we're trying to accomplish out here. So the final few sentences are by the Aberjona Initiative. Our goal is to continue working with various town employees, boards and organizations, the DPW, the Winchester Cultural District Managing Partnership, and the Select Board, and every other group or individual interested in working towards our goal. Please support this significant effort to enhance the beauty of our downtown by providing greater access for everyone to engage with our waterfront. So that's really, if you can take a step back from the calculations on the square feet, and a point worth making is that the town has a very strong policy through its Conservation Commission about protecting the 25-foot buffer zone to any wetland. So if you go from the edge of the water or the edge of the wetlands inland 25 feet, that's essentially a no-disturb protected area by the Conservation Commission. So if somebody came in and said, well, you've done all the restoration work, but now we want to rip it out and do something else, you'd be in that protected no-disturb zone. And by the way, everything that we're proposing is within 25 feet of the edge of the wetland, so it theoretically has that protection as well.
Go ahead, Bill. Then I'll go last.
Michelle,
Yes?
can I make a comment and address the board? Or address the table?
You can. I'd asked for that about 10 minutes ago, but if you could, come on up.
Okay.
If anybody else thinks they might have a comment, please approach the table.
Hey, everybody. My name is Zeke Nims. I'm the Vice Chair of the Conservation Commission. Been on that board for about a decade. Have a very long history with 10 Converse Place. And this discussion is an initial question about the feasibility, whether they should invest more time and energy into this topic. And this proposal on this pond's edge is to satisfy your needs. Town doesn't need to do this. Normal mitigation is literally off-site, and it is literally purchased so that there isn't encumbered by legal issues. Separately, this bank is not degraded. It is possibly compromised, and we are actively restoring it currently. We've invested, I don't know, like 40 grand so far, specifically in the banks that we're describing here today. So I would just suggest that this is not necessarily the only site you guys have to consider for their proposal. There's plenty of sites on this riverine system that could be actually mitigated compared to maybe being improved. So maybe you could consider that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So if we could get a list of those sites, we'll take a look at them. And that's not a request to you. I think it's a request to Zeke.
Yep, I think that's, yep. Did you hear that, Concom? The request was that there's a list of sites that you would suggest for mitigation that are not immediately adjacent to Mill Pond. If you could share that with Mr. Beals and the team. Appreciate that. Bill, go ahead.
We could be here all night and tomorrow with my questions, but I don't think I'm even the right person to ask them. I've heard a lot of questions from town council that need to be answered. I've heard questions from Concom, both the chair and the vice chair. Ms. Court raised a number earlier this evening. We received a written comment from Ms. Maura Sullivan that has even more beyond that. And while I appreciate that you guys are here with all the best intentions, we also know the old saying about good intentions. And the fact is that this property is right in the middle of town. It is really the heart of our town in many ways. It's something that we see every single day. And we have to make sure that anything that happens there is done with the greatest care, not just for what we need as a town and what you need as developers, but what we're going to need into perpetuity. And so I don't know if you're asking for any sort of action from us tonight, but I'll say that until I can be confident that all of these different interests have weighed in, council, conservation committee, the public, the planning board, anybody else, I'm not going to be comfortable doing anything. I think there's just too much out there. So I want to take this slow. I want to measure twice. cut once, and of course, do the best thing we can for everyone's interest here. But I just want to set that expectation now, because until everybody does really have that chance to see what you guys are proposing, and we get all the possible relevant, pertinent, helpful input that we can, I'm just not going to be comfortable moving too fast. So.
Okay. I think it's your microphone. You can keep it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so used to passing it around now.
No, they give me one at school.
Our own Phil Donahue right there. There you go.
Yeah, if you want to hold it, that's cool. I can
add
walk around.
One more piece to this too, that, and this is really up to the Concom, is that in addition to the DEP side of this, which is deciding a kind of the bigger component of the wetland permitting, there's a smaller wetland component, and that relates to the land court litigation, which the Concom denied under a small component of the local wetland bylaws. That is still out there and would have to get resolved either favorably between the parties or by the court in order for things to move forward there. So there might be room for discussion there. I would defer to the Concom on how they'd want to move forward on that, because that relates to the project as a whole, not to this mitigation. Yeah.
Thanks, Jay. That's a good clarification or reminder, I guess. Mike?
Yeah, thank you guys for coming in, and this was a very helpful presentation. As you know, we rezoned the Center Business District back in 2015. We identified certain parcels around town where we invited development of this kind. This is one of those parcels, and we've had a lot of interest over the years. It's a tough spot. I think I'd like to see it developed in some way that finds balance with some of the community's interests. I do see that there's a benefit to the town for restoration of this area where there has been a lot of erosion, and there will continue to be erosion over the years with that there. And with it being connected to the property, I think it's in your best interest, if your project is developed, to keep it and maintain it, consistently, rather than something that is off-site. So, and I would assume that we would work out an agreement when we get into the details about access for town residents and everything. So I see it more as a public-private partnership than just handing things over to you. So I appreciate this. My only question for you is, well, I have several, but the only one I'll ask is, how about the footprint, for this project? I know that you had mentioned maybe changing it, shifting it. The community wasn't happy with the prior rendition of where it was, but is this going to be the same? Is it going to change a little bit? I know we're kind of at an early stage of the process, and we have a very small part of this, but I'm just curious more than anything.
Sure. That's a great idea, perhaps, to step back a little bit and talk about the project in general. So we've inherited this project. We're acquiring it from the previous developer, who you're all familiar with from him presenting at the other boards. The project was unviable. Ultimately, he's gone bankrupt with it, and we're taking it over to hopefully do something that will, finally be executable. So for the most part, in doing so, we tried to leave everything exactly as it was approved. We appreciated that it was a long and involved process, and it gave an outcome that it seemed like everyone was satisfied with, setting aside the conservation issue as it was approved. So with that in mind, we basically said that's what we want to do, sort of minimize the changes as much as possible. That said, we also need to ensure that the project can be developed and can be successful. And so we do need to make a few changes. None to the footprint of the building, actually. More on the insides of the building. So, for example, we'll be going to the planning board in a week or two to discuss those matters in detail. But, for example, the parking system was an automated parking system that you'd see more like in a hotel or in a valet 24/7 staffed arrangement. Not viable for a project like this, which is just going to be home ownership of regular people who want to just go down and get their car and leave. So that change sort of rippled into a few other changes on the inside of the building. So, for example, instead of that automated system, we're going to have traditional parking. And because there's not enough room on the first floor, we have to go down another level of parking. So we'd have a 2-floor parking garage, for example. The first floor would need to be primarily parking instead of primarily parking with a little bit of retail and a few residential units. We'll have to leave those. We'll still be multifamily. We'll still keep retail, especially as it's facing the waterfront. That was important to the constituents, we felt. And changes like that. So we can go into those more at the planning board where it's probably more appropriate. But wanted to just let you know, for the most part, we're trying to leave the project intact. So in terms of the need for the mitigation, we thought it was interesting that that was part of the long history here. And we're totally open to working with Conservation Commission. We're a fresh face. We don't have some of the history, and that creates some perhaps beneficial naivete, which we can work together. We want to find the best place to do this work. Anything we do is supposed to be good for the town and, of course, good for the project. So if it's not along this front and it's somewhere else, that's great. If it's along here because it could be improved, although not as substantially as somewhere else, we're open to it. The only thing we would ask is if we could accelerate things. It's been many years. The project has floundered and is withering. I think it sounds like there's a general feeling that getting rid of the existing building would be an improvement for the town, and improving the bike path and other things along the way that would come with it could hopefully be an improvement for the town. And we're looking to move forward, but we do need to move somewhat in earnest. Even if it's just, obviously, there's a lot of details and things that need to be worked out. We appreciate that. But if we could even just get some tacit sort of next steps to say, okay, if we talk to Conservation Commission, we can get some ideas where the mitigation would be best served. Perhaps you would be willing to support that. That's the kind of direction we'd like to get. Perhaps tonight, as informal as it may be, just to know that we should keep moving forward with this project, or if we should just sort of let it wither on the vine. We haven't acquired the property yet. That's the biggest thing. Our acquisition and building permit need to be in by the end of the fiscal year for this project to be viable. So we just have to move quickly.
What's the end of your fiscal year?
Meaning that there are various codes and standards that are going to be changing. So if we don't have our building permit in, all the plans and things that we've been planning will have to change.
What's that date? That's what I'm
the end
asking.
of your fiscal year.
June 30th.
Which I believe is June 30th, right?
Okay.
Yes.
I thought you said your fiscal year. I was just trying to understand if you were working on different
Yes.
calendars. Okay.
We're just trying to accommodate the June 30th.
Okay. So I think my question, and I appreciate that, Paul, I think that's a fair point too. My question is, because I wasn't here on the board when all this happened, and certainly we did rezone downtown. It is under the purview of the planning board, so any change you have to your footprint or design goes to planning board first. We are very much literally downstream of this decision for all intents and purposes. I'm curious if there was ever is there a building size or design on that spot that wouldn't require mitigation of riverfront land? If you built something smaller further back, is there something else that could go there that wouldn't involve these kinds of conversations having to occur?
Yeah, so if you remember the numbers we went through, and we need 10,000 square feet of mitigation. It's a tricky math question that you asked, so I'll check my number. But let me talk about it in a general sense. If we shrunk everything down so that we had sufficient mitigation area on the site,
That's my question.
that's the answer, that we wouldn't have to go off-site, but the building would have to be smaller.
And thus, it wouldn't be viable. There's a lender involved that hasn't foreclosed yet on the previous owner, but that won't sell it for less than, it's even a fraction of what they've actually lent to the original. And the economics just work out that a project this size doesn't really, it just barely works. So we'll actually be talking to the planning board about how we can reallocate the size on the existing footprint next week, on March 4th, I should say. So any footprint that gets smaller means we can't fit parking. Parking is a huge concern for, obviously, for people that live in the area and also the people that would live in the building. So ultimately, it wouldn't be viable to shrink it to the point we wouldn't need off-site mitigation.
Paul, what's I forget, it's been a little while since I looked at this, but what's the proposed height of the building? Is it 60 feet or what?
So currently it's 62 feet is
62.
approved. We actually, on the March 4th, will be asking to go just 7 feet taller. We need about 69 feet to make the program work.
Okay.
It'll be ultimately a 69-foot instead of a 62-foot building, if approved.
Yeah, it would, but that's not going to add another story. That's just going to accommodate the parking or?
Well, we would be reallocating that height.
Yep.
The ceiling heights were just way too tall.
Okay.
So because the first floor puzzle system, that automated parking system, needed very tall floors, we don't need that
I see.
in a traditional parking. So we're reallocating that space into what would actually be 6 windows, 6 stories instead of 5. But it's only 7 feet. It's not when you think of a story, you might think of 10 or 15 feet. It's like half that because of the reallocation of height.
Okay.
But it would be a 6-story, 69-foot building.
Okay.
Michael, the current building's 62 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
The existing building?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So thank you for answering my question. It seems like any development here is going to require mitigation in town, right? And it seems like there needs to be some, we would have a decision to make. We could make that decision without considering Conservation Commission. We could make the decision tonight, though not Mr. McGonigal. And I'm not saying we're prepared to, but it seems as if without inviting additional blowback, we might want to understand if there's other sites, other places we could do this. And I would have concern around kind of the perpetual nature of an easement. Not that we're going to do anything behind the library, but that is a pretty highly trafficked spot. So I don't know if anybody else on the board feels that we want to sort of take even a straw poll this evening, but we want, I think there's, if we're trying to build housing in our downtown and we're trying to invest in our downtown, we ought to find ways to build housing in our downtown and not find ways not to. But I'm not comfortable right now saying have the whole Mill Pond and the library and everything else without understanding, to Jay's point, licenses and what that ties our hands to do. But that's just me. So if anybody else wants to throw a different motion out there, happy to entertain it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm happy to continue to work with you on this project. Obviously, the devil is in the details. I think, I'm pleased that you're taking over. There will be something built here someday, hopefully soon, and hopefully it's supported by the community. You're not a fly-by-night operation, so I trust that working together will produce a good outcome. So, if we're taking a straw poll, I certainly would be in favor of moving forward. Of course, doesn't mean voting, on the ultimate question, but certainly continuing to kind of kick the tires on this, I think it makes sense for us.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else wants to share I think Bill shared, he's got some questions, so, okay.
I would just, I guess it's partly a question for Jay. So if the timeline is this June 30th building permit, that would mean that if we have to do a permanent easement, that would have to go to springtime meeting, and the warrant for that closes in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, 2.5 weeks.
So, Jay, looking to you in terms of what that would entail to be able to bring something forward to springtime meeting.
For town meeting stuff, assuming we went that way rather than being like a co-applicant, which would be the other way to do it without that. And then I would also have to examine the Article 97 stuff, because that might inform what we would have to do in terms of a town meeting article. I don't think that is particularly a heavy lift from a drafting perspective. Obviously, we have to do a little bit of research. So I think that's all feasible if we added a placeholder now to kind of see what that would look like, depending upon ultimately what the select board wants to do, convey it or be subjected to it, either way. From a timeline,
But conveyance would would have requirements under Chapter 30B, right? In terms of.
yeah, I mean, that can be somewhat perfunctory, but still, as we saw with 955 Main Street or something like that, it's not always as easy as it might seem. from a timeline perspective, I think that the other seat at the table is going to have to be, if their goal is June 30, is going to have to be the Concom. And I think that I'm not going to step on the toes of Dr. Miller or anyone else in the Concom. You're going to have to. You have no hope in Hades of getting done with that piece of litigation by June 30th in the current state. I mean, the timeline just is impossible for that. So that's
Without a
work,
settlement.
right? That's work that you have to do, and I don't think anyone on this board is speaking for the Concom here, and I'm just their counsel. I mean, I stay in communication with the Concom on it, but that's something that you would have to drill down into and get them satisfied with this. They had remaining concerns. I'm not going to talk about that litigation outside of an exec session, but we know how slow litigation goes.
Especially land court. Okay.
So if we're moving towards the possibility of some sort of easement, we would need to bring an article to the board for your next meeting. So does the board want to have Jay draft that article for consideration at your next meeting?
So I'm going to need a description of, and I have a little bit, Larry, but I'm going to need a better description of the work, and then I'm going to have to get information underlying the status of that property and whatever historical documents there are to help structure that, and then compare it with the new statute that governs Article 97 land and see what that looks like from the kind of approvals we have to be asking town meeting for that. And then ultimately, we're still going to have to decide whether or not we're conveying something to them or we're becoming part of the permitting process, which might inform that as well. So I think there's going to be another discussion. I can look at forms of various warrant articles depending on which way we go. I don't think that's super hard, but I need some more information.
Okay.
I'm happy to move forward with an easement for next meeting. Doesn't mean that we're going to vote favorably on it. We're going to move it forward. And even if we put an article on the warrant, doesn't mean that, we're going to move forward with it either, right? So, but I think putting those steps in place to give us the option, I think is makes sense.
And not that, these gentlemen want to hear that it may not happen at springtime meeting, it's fall town meeting, the work of understanding what it might need to be.
Yeah.
It's probably useful to do now. And if there are other sites the Conservation Commission has for mitigation that easements would be given or granted elsewhere, if you could share that with town council, that could be part of what that language looks like as well. So I agree, Mike, let's move forward, Jay, with drafting something that we may need at a future town meeting, perhaps as soon as spring, pending a lot of other things having to sort of settle. But we would need it at some point, probably. So I think it's time well spent.
Can I ask a question? One of the things that was brought up was sort of public hearing or public engagement, given the public nature of this land. Is that something that would happen or would need to happen before a town meeting? Would town meeting be kind of considered that? How would
Certainly, we could have a separate hearing. We always would have a hearing on the warrant, but we could have a separate public hearing on this in the run-up to town meeting, for sure. Planning board has their own hearing. If anything changes in the planning board meeting in a couple of weeks, that could change as well. But planning board has a hearing, the town manager has a hearing. So I think we could schedule something specific for this, or at least a dedicated portion of the town manager's hearing for that.
May I ask if there's another way to do this? Is it possible that we simply provide, for example, a plan and fund the effort rather than have to have conveyances and do it ourselves? I know in some cases, if it's determined that it would be great if, we can have X dollars to make these improvements in Y places. It's really that maybe what's holding back the town might be perhaps just the funding or the manpower or something. What if we went and considered that sort of a route where we just provided the funding and or the manpower and allowed the town to do with it what it likes? Because we don't really want we don't want town land. We're not trying to get that. It's necessary perhaps as a legal mechanism, but maybe this is a different way to do it.
I'm not exactly sure what you're recommending. I mean, again, there's two ways for us to lock up this piece of land pursuant to what DEP appears to want. That's either for us to be a co-applicant because it's our land, or to give them the necessary interest in the land so that they can go forward with DEP. So that's still a policy question that this board's going to have to grapple with. We certainly can avoid some of the town meeting elements by being a co-applicant, but it's also a bigger ask in some ways from being part of the permitting scheme.
Yep.
But, I mean, as Mike said, there's been a long-standing interest in some redevelopment over there, so maybe it's worth it. That's something you'll have to think about.
And if we were a co-applicant, what I'm hearing, Paul, is maybe then there would be a financial contribution for us to do the work. We wouldn't necessarily hand over the property to you. We would still retain it, but the improvements would be done when we would do them.
That's our understanding, but the DEP obligation that we have, as I understand it, is to do this mitigation, do the plantings, do the fixing up. And that doesn't mean we have to do it, perhaps it just needs to get done. So if we funded it, and, I would think that there's probably a bunch of town initiatives, perhaps Conservation Commission will help us understand the highest priorities if this area isn't the highest priority. And we could just go through those and say, we have sort of a new pocket of money that you never had before. And now you can get all these priorities done if you like, and that would satisfy everybody's needs. We would satisfy the DEP requirements to move forward, and perhaps the Conservation Commission would satisfy some of its goals under the Abidjona initiative.
And the Conservation Commission, ultimately, if there was this pot of money, they would oversee that, right? That would be them that would do it.
Yes.
I guess is.
I think that's
So,
Well, but the restriction would still remain in perpetuity, which means that the town would be on the hook for any future maintenance of that.
Yeah, we don't know what it looks like yet, so we don't know what that future maintenance or responsibility would be, who would be monitoring it, how it would go, so.
We expect that from the DEP's decision, correct?
Well, I think we'd want to have an advance.
And we have a hint of that already from the DEP that said it won't require any maintenance.
My guess
So-
is we probably want more than a hint before deciding.
Yep. Okay. So I know we have like 8 other things to get through tonight. If we could, Jay, if you could work on some paths forward. Potentially, I would encourage you to talk with Conservation Commission. Let's see what other options are out there, what other sites are available. And then if the board, if there are specific questions for Jay, let's get them in writing, through Beth to Jay, to make sure we have the answers that we need for our next meeting. Okay? Thanks for the updates. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
I'm gonna run to the restroom, Michelle.
That for a minute. Okay.
You can just vote for me. So.
We won't be there yet.
Say exactly
Right.
we want to know exactly what they're going to require.
I tried.
It's a weird situation, and then now with the new legislation that's around Article 97, I really have to.
He should
But you get all my comments.
unrelated.
No, that's not. But that's
You can just read his notes.
That's me. I need to get here. You're fine. Thank you.
They eventually pulled out.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, that's,
Too bad.
yeah. I think they had great ideas.
I think they raised probably. I mean, it was a tough piece to give advice.
You're gonna miss this.
In some way. Okay, so if we could have Mark come on up, Leanne and Bob. Bob's already making his way. I'm losing track of people where they're seated here.
Can you do your pitch in 2 minutes or less?
No, probably not.
Not 2 minutes. I'll have 5.
Yeah. Too bad.
I'll take that.
Who's coming?
We don't, Jay? Oh, it's in Washington Street.
Town meeting. Ken must be here for every source, I gotta figure. All right.
He's here for the license for the.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. I don't want to share about the trees. All right, so, Mark, if you want to go ahead, and Leanne and Bob, thank you. Water rates, thanks for your patience.
Hi.
Hi.
Matt Abrams.
We have your package, so go ahead.
Okay. Matt Abrams from the Abrams Group, back to talk about water and sewer. As you'll recall, we were before this board just a few weeks back.
December,
was it? Early December, I believe.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
To give you
anyway.
what we're now calling a mid-year update, it's really just an update on what we've learned since we last set rates. So now what we've done is we've taken that one step forward to start looking at the next rate setting period, which will be for FY26. So our update has been expanded to include that fifth year. We're now looking at FY30, and not a whole lot has changed since we were last before you in December. We have received the preliminary MWA assessments. Those came out about a week and a half ago, something like that. And those assessments were very much in line with what we had projected. So there's not a whole lot of change related to that in our analysis. It was pretty much in line there. So I'm going to run through some slides just to give you a quick update on where things stand, but also to start talking about potential rates for FY26.
Something might work over there. Only one presentation tonight is allowed to use that mouse. It's not yours.
I think it's so snake bitten.
You have to keep putting quarters in.
Exactly.
I just might not know how to use it.
Okay.
If you click the left, does it go? Okay. What did you click?
Right there.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, she's got the magic touch. Okay, FY25, the current fiscal year, update related to that. For the current fiscal year, thinking back to last spring, the Select Board supported a rate plan with a water sewer rate increase of 9.5% and a per bill service charge increase from $30 to $35 for FY25. That is the plan that was supported by this board that was then presented at town meeting. It also included, because we always give you multiple years that we're looking at, 9.5% annually beyond just FY26. I'm sorry, FY25 in this case. 3 additional years of 9.5% and 6% in FY29. And as you may recall, we're always targeting a retained earnings balance of between 8% and 10% with all the work that we do. Town meeting approved the recommendation of this board, 9.5% water and sewer rate increase and the $5 per bill service charge for FY25, again, the current fiscal year. When we reviewed things just a few weeks back, we were pretty much sticking with the same exact plan, except we did increase that outlying year from 6% to 9.5%. So the other years didn't change. The outlying year did, just because we thought that additional revenue would be needed. It was mostly tied to the MWA sewer increase. You may recall that we've talked about that before, that the MWA sewer assessments ended up being a little bit higher than we were initially anticipating because of some meter changeouts from estimated to actual reads, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. FY25 projections, your billings, your revenue are way up over FY24. If we think back to last summer, very dry at the end of the summer. That meant a lot of outdoor water usage. What that ultimately means for what we're projecting for revenues, we're looking at $7.7 million in projected user charge revenue for FY25. That's up from $6.1 million from FY24. That's obviously a huge difference. That has, of course, the rate increase that was approved, plus the service charge that plays into that, but also the weather patterns greatly play into that. Thinking back to the last meeting that I was at, here in this room, the Select Board did authorize the use of $317,000-ish of ARPA funds to offset the MWA assessment. That has been included in our analysis. We are projecting a surplus of $1.6 million for FY25, again, in large part because of the strong revenues. Also, we're factoring in the ARPA funding, we're factoring in retained earnings funding. If we take out the ARPA funding, if we take out the retained earnings funding, it's essentially a break even. So what that means is even though there's a strong revenue year, you needed that strong revenue in order to cover your expenses, if you were to take out the ARPA and the retained earnings funding. So now we're looking forward. That's essentially a look at the current fiscal year. Now we're looking forward. Again, a busy slide. I'll walk through this. The MWA assessment, there's some numbers related to that. Again, this was in line with what we projected. But thinking back to the dry period last year, that does impact the FY26 assessment. The assessment is up 376,000. This is water. 376,000 total, 18.5% over the prior year. The O&M piece is up 20%. Now, we always focus on O&M because that is 100% on rates cover that 100%. I should say water and sewer revenues cover that 100%, but rates are the biggest revenue in there. Whereas the capital assessment is part of the Chapter 110 covers a large amount of that. So we do end up focusing on the O&M piece a little bit more for that reason, and that's why I've included it on this slide. Sewer assessment, 393,000 up, that's 7.3% over the prior year. These are preliminary, but usually the preliminary isn't that far off from the final, right? Yeah. Okay. O&M up 237,000, 10.5%. As mentioned earlier, this is the third straight year of the larger sewer O&M increase because of those actual versus estimated reads. And I have the percentages up here. So the first year of that was 30.9% increase, then 19.3% increase, and now we're at, I believe, 7.3% increase over that. Now, the reason why it's 3 years is because the MWA factors in 3 years of usage in the assessment. So that should be it in terms of that increased impact, meaning once we get to FY27.
Will stay high, but the
Right.
percent increase won't.
Yes,
grow.
thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying. What that means is that the increases will normalize to what they were prior to this happening, which was somewhere between 2.5% and 3.2% annually. Now, that's obviously a big difference from those percentages that are up there at the top, but still, they're going to be going up just at a more normal.
We're seeing light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. All right, capital plan. We are including the numbers related to that because that usually has a big impact on what we're looking at. Capital outlay, which we assume will be funded out of retained earnings. Of course, that means it has to be authorized for that to happen. But we're assuming that in our analysis. The total over the 6 years that we're looking at is $2 million. That works out to be a little more than $400,000 a year. Last year's study, I did want to point this out because that's a big jump from last year's study when it was only $358,000 total that was included. So 358 up to $2 million, that's a huge difference in terms of what's included in the capital plan to be funded out of retained earnings. And obviously that has an impact on rates if you're funding out of retained earnings.
What's in that 2 million? The dam? What are
No,
the
these
projects?
are more like equipment-related things and smaller projects. If you want, I can read that to you. Would you like me to read some things from it?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
helpful.
Okay. Anything related to MS4 is included in that number. We're assuming $200,000 per year for that. That's the stormwater permit. Sorry. Oh, here we go. And Bob, I might ask you to speak to some of these. We have for FY27, $125,000 water treatment plant tank resurfacing. The backhoe for $230,000. Glen Green flood mitigation design, $100,000. Service truck for $175,000. Winford Way sewage pump station design, $200,000. Utility truck, $90,000. Risley Road upgrade design, $100,000. And plus all the MS4 might get you there.
Yeah, that's the OE years, right?
Yeah, that's not all in 1 year. That's, as I was speaking, we were going out to the right in the capital plan.
So Bob, are those equipment replacing existing equipment or is that additional equipment?
No, replacing existing.
Okay, thank you.
And would we expect any of that to be funded through capital stabilization? Or all on water and sewer?
It's typically always funded through water and sewer. Yeah, it's historically how it's been.
What happens in other communities that don't have Chapter 110? do they go through their stabilization funds to support, some of these trucks and some of these kind of ongoing operating expenses? I just don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a local decision always. I've seen fund out of retained earnings. I've seen communities that don't want to have that 1 year impact of a purchase. They'll spread it out over multiple years via borrowing, even if it's for a smaller amount. But in their case, it's fully funded through water and sewer because they don't have the Chapter 110.
Yep.
Different here in Winchester. But there are communities that want to not impact that year as much, so they do choose to borrow and then spread out the cost over multiple years for that reason.
We do that too with some of the bigger stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think here in town, at least for our assumptions, some of the smaller things like equipment, we usually assume out of retained earnings. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, but that's what we include in our analysis. So the remaining piece of the capital plan, we have some other numbers for you here, but now we're getting to the borrowing piece. $29 million total projects for the 10-year plan, and we look at water, sewer, and stormwater when we do that. We assume borrowings for all of those, and as we just mentioned with the Chapter 110, that covers 86.45% of water and sewer debt, which means that the remainder, 13.255%, is on rates. And as already mentioned, anything capital outlay that is retained earnings is 100% on rates. For what we have projected for debt for that $29.4 million, that works out to be about $5.7 million additional debt from FY27 and FY30 that we've included in our analysis. Now, 86.45 of that would be offset by Chapter 110, but that's the expense number right there, that 5.7. Other projection-related things, just a quick comment. This is a slight tweak from what we had for you prior. For revenue assumptions, for the last few years, we were using FY22 billings as the basis for that. And why I wanted to point this out is because we went a little bit more conservative with our revenue projections. We had been carrying FY22 up until last year. That was the most conservative year over the last 5 years in terms of weather patterns, usage. Then FY24 happened, and that was a much more conservative year. So we thought we had gone conservative enough with FY22 just to guard against that really wet year and being able to, have your revenues cover your expenses as much as possible. And then we saw FY24, which was a lower usage year and therefore actually a lower revenue year, even though there were rate increases in between those 2 years. So now we're averaging FY22 and FY24 just because we wanted to be a little bit more conservative there. That's just FYI. So now thinking forward with no rate action, we are still looking at large annual deficits annually. So in other words, the revenues are still not keeping up. Now, again, based on conservative revenue estimates. That's what these numbers mean. Also, I wanted you to be aware that that assumes the full funding of the capital items that we've talked about. Of course, that we don't know that for sure. That hasn't been authorized yet. But in our analysis, we do include that, assuming that they will be authorized. So we have the FY26 deficit as $1.3 million. That's without rate action. No action at all. $1.3 million. And as you know, we look out 5 years. So by the end of the 5th year, end of the 5-year look, we're looking at a $3 million deficit in FY30. Thinking about retained earnings, which I've projected, I think it's going to be somewhere around $1.6 million after this fiscal year completes. That's a nice number. It's a nice number and has a lot to do with the revenue projections coming in as high as they did. So that is a nice number, but looking at that $1.3 million number, you have enough retained earnings in theory to cover it. Again, without rate action, but there wouldn't be enough to go beyond that 1 year. Any questions on this?
I don't know, maybe. But go see what the next slide is.
I'll keep going. Here we go. This pie chart we've included before. It's just a quick breakdown on what makes up the budget in terms of dollars and percentages. The biggest amount being that bottom left is the MWA capital piece. That would be water capital and sewer capital combined into that number. Again, the Chapter 110 covers offsets a large portion of that, but that is part of your budget in that amount. The O&M assessments is to the right of that, just over $3.1 million, fully covered by rates. The next section is the blue above that, what we call water sewer operating expenses. So that's everything that's part of the operating budget that isn't an MWRA assessment. $2.7 million or 20% of the budget. Indirects make up about $1.8 million. That's 13% of the budget. And then existing local debt service, debt that's on the books currently, $1.8 million, 13%. And that's also offset by the Chapter 110.
So this is great, because this is where my question was going to go. If we didn't have local debt, and don't die, Bob, I'm not trying to like not invest in your system, right? But if that local debt, that 13% of the budget wasn't there, we could almost operate in the black every year. It looks like, right? Our revenues would cover indirect, operating, and assessments between rates.
I'm going to say no, because there's a revenue piece that's tied to that local debt service. The Chapter 110 is covering 86% of that.
Okay.
So you'd have to take out 1.8 from a different area.
Indirect costs.
Or take out 88% of that. Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm just trying to understand how close we are to operating the enterprise without, again, I'm not trying to not invest, but the cost to operate the enterprise is what? And then there's the things that we invest in and purchase and fund long-term. Because I don't know that we shouldn't look in a few years' time, or as part of, if we're looking at override conversations as we are, this goes into everyone's, monthly budget, quarterly bill. Capital is just your tax bill, right? And we put a lot on a user for debt that we have other debt services for. I realize it's been our practice, but
I'll get you an answer.
Look at the summary on the workbook.
Well, the total budget is 15 million if you add all that up, but
right,
we're trying to figure out the difference between the two, right?
it's okay. It's okay. I just think as we explain, when people get questions, why is my water bill so high, right? It's not just because we've done improvements to the dam. It's not just because we've invested, we have to buy new equipment all the time. And we have this behemoth MWRA agency that just sticks us with the bill. Doesn't matter.
Right.
Can't control that. It's not about usage, not about watering your lawn. It's, you're tied into our sewer. This is what we charge you. But if it was, so there's user behaviors that can control some of your bill. And then there's a bunch of other things that you can't impact in your bill. And then there's the way we pay for improvements to the overall infrastructure. And the same way the transfer station is carrying debt for improvements there. I just think as a town, we ought to look at where should some of those costs be borne in different ways than just user fees. But we're not, that's not a decision for tonight. I think we're kind of in a path,
I think
a
that's
pattern
a question, though, that we
that
need
we're
to
in.
answer at some point. I mean,
But I think it is.
Well, and we've talked about it before of like the piloting meters, and I know I've asked, is the user fee,
You mean the service charge?
the service charge at the $35 per household, like we've talked about that as it compares to meter size and things like that. So, if there are also possibilities to look at how that would impact the assessment.
If we change the service charge based on meter size.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think, we do that, and that will flow down to people who are renting or in condos and in buildings where there's a larger meter, then that's just going to increase their
90% of our meters
rent,
are
right?
probably one size.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not a big range of meter sizes.
It's not going to be a huge.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But I do want to come back to that, but maybe, because I have the same thought, but maybe Matt, I don't know how many more slides you have. Do you have a couple more slides?
Yeah, I think maybe 3 or 4 more.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't need my answer, it's fine. Because I was just saying it out loud.
All right, there we go. All right, so now we're getting into rate options. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending this option, but I wanted to show you what we calculated as what I'm calling a quote-unquote catch-up. So we talked a little bit about how revenues aren't necessarily keeping up with expenses at this point. Well, if we wanted to get to that point, this is what it could look like, okay? And the reason why, how I came up with this was I totaled what the expense increases were year over year, and I came up with about 4.5% annually. If we look at total expenses and how we have them increasing in our analysis, 4.5% annually. So you'll see that 4.5% in the outlying years in that top row. Well, what's the 1 year to get you to the point where you could do 4.5%? We have that as a 20% increase in 1 year. Okay, now again, not necessarily recommending this, but just wanted to show you what it would look like if you wanted to do that, right? Like a market correction, so to speak.
That's the sell your house now number.
Okay, so we're going to work kind of downward from there. All right, next, option 1. What we decided to do with option 1 was to include a rate increase that was the focus of this board before we got into the increases related to the MWA sewer assessment. So that 6.75 might look familiar, for that reason, but we're going back a few years on that. So if you wanted to consider what I'll call a lower increase in year 1, which we have at 6.7%, then that would mean something, 6.75%, then that would mean obviously a little bit of a higher increase in the subsequent year to make up for that. So we have that as 15%. Now, this board is probably only going to recommend a rate for the next fiscal year, but we did want you to be aware of what that means for our overall analysis for the 5 years. That's why we give you multiple years to look at. And then 7% in the outlying years. In terms of the impact on users' bills, these are per bill impacts. We always focus on the average residential user's bill. That's about a $14.50-ish increase per bill. The 6.75% for the average residential user. And you can see with the graph, what we do is we show what we think the projected retained earnings will be, which is the blue line, compared to the target, which is the 8% to the 10%. That's the shaded area. And usually with our analysis, we're okay with the blue going below the orange as long as it works its way back there. So that's what we've presented for you here. Option 1, quickly get through the other ones. Try to get through them. 2, we took a different approach, higher year 1, which means lower in the subsequent years, 12.5%, and then 7.5, 7.5. If the 12.5% were to be authorized, that's about a $27 per bill quarterly amount for the average residential user. And option 3, we went level, which is something that this board has been interested in the past, 9% per year. And that works out to be about $19 per quarter. And I just wanted to point out real quick that because we're focused on the level, remember we did change the revenue projections, but if we were to go back to that FY22, just so you have something else to think about, that would be 8.25 per year. So by changing the revenue estimates to be more conservative, it went from 8.25 per year to 9% per year. And those were all the slides that we had for you this evening, so happy to take questions, comments, and further the discussion.
Thank you.
It's gross. Gross.
Okay, I'll go. So I did a little research over the weekend. I looked at some other towns. I got my father-in-law's water bill to just compare. And to Anthony's point that we did talk about previously about meter sizes, I didn't go to a bunch of towns, right? But Arlington, Melrose, Burlington, Belmont, Hingham, those are the 5 or so I looked at, all do charge by meter size. So I know we probably can't turn on a dime for July 1, but even if it's 10% of the meters and it is serving more units, that seems to be pretty standard. right? So if the fee is $30, $35 for the, the small size meter that goes on the one family, two family house, great. But right now we have connection fees that are pretty consistent, regardless of how big we're delivering water to a building. Looking at you, River Street, right, or Cambridge Street, and the next properties coming online. I think we got to get in the habit of, and I don't know what that price ought to be, but it's $50, $60 in some other towns before you even get to commercial kitchens and restaurants. So I think we ought to be looking at that. I don't know if we can do it. I'm looking at Leanne and Bob. You can say yes or no, but and that's pennies on the dollar. But getting in the habit, because we do expect more development of various types, clusters, mixed use, North Main. There's usually 2 or 3 different tiers of meter sizes, and it's 35, 40, up to 60. I think we ought to be looking at that. And I think the other question is, if we had a very good revenue year, right, coming in, we have some retained earnings, why would we have to go up 12 or even 9% this next year? If we're actually in a good position, we had a dry fall, we had an infusion of ARPA cash. So why would we need 9% in FY26? Is that just because we're being conservative for potentially a rainy summer?
That is part of it, for sure. Yes.
Okay.
Because if you do have that rainy summer, you won't necessarily bring in as much revenue as I showed you earlier.
Yep.
Like, for example, I know there's a rate increase worked into there, but FY24 was $6.1 million in user charges revenue. Then it went to 7.7. So what if you end up with usage that's down on the lower end again? You're going to be somewhere in that $6 million range, right? So, I mean, unfortunately, we can't predict the weather patterns.
Yep.
But when we do this type of analysis, we try to be conservative for that reason, because if that were to happen, we want you to be protected, so to speak.
Still trying to get up to that 8 to 10% retained earnings. So we're not there yet, so we're building it up. So we got to increase so that we can build that back up.
Yeah.
That I get.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't be increasing. It's just, it's been dramatic over the last several years. And even if it's, $14 a quarter every year, it's, I know we want to get back to that 8% and we're below, but do we think we can get there over a longer period of time? I don't know. But I don't like a 14 or 12% increase next year when we've just had, I mean, throw out the ARPA, but that was a nice infusion. But we had a dry summer.
It wasn't the whole summer.
Right? A dry fall.
Yeah, it was late summer.
We had wildfires, this is true,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In the North Shore, anyway, not here.
Very bad drought towards the end. Yeah.
But I think the point you made is important, that we're now using FY24 as our most conservative year. And if we went to what we were using a few years ago, which was FY22, what did you say this would be? 8
and a quarter.
8 and a quarter. So we've shifted to be, we've always kind of err on the side of most conservative in terms of the year we use. And now that's the most conservative year we're using as a base. Because I think in that year, we had a rate increase, but we actually generated less revenue than the year before.
Right.
I know, because it was such a rainy summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. The weather kills us.
When we did the user charge increase last year, what if we were to consider, a FY29 user charge increase? And that's kind of regressive, but I mean, what if we were to factor in at some level a user charge increase down the road as well?
Keeping the service charge?
So, service charge, yeah, I did it again.
I just want to make sure.
So just to kind of put that in perspective, the $5 service charge increase only gained you, and I'm talking about what happened last year, only gained you about $35,000 annually. It's not, I mean, it matters to people obviously because they see their bill go up, but in terms of the impact on your bottom line and your revenue, it doesn't have a whole lot of impact. Just the $5. I mean, obviously, if it was a higher amount, it would have more of an impact.
If we went for the larger meters at $60 or something, that would be. But I don't really know off the top of my head how many large meters we have.
Yeah, we're on a lot.
I don't think so either. I was thinking the same thing I always do every year when we have a high revenue. I always think, oh, maybe we won't have to increase it this year, but like you said, it only covers FY '26,
Right.
the extra, and
Yep.
that's it.
With no rate action. Yes.
I mean, Leanne, I'm not that naive to think we'd never increase it. The MWRA is not giving us an increased bill.
Exactly.
Right? So
Yeah.
there's that.
Right.
Yeah.
It never goes away.
But if it was 7% is their assessment, I'd rather see our increases be in the 7 to 8% range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to have this sort of public hearing in 2 weeks' time, right, on the sewer rates. We don't need to decide tonight, but I think we want to get a sense of the board of where do we want to land. So I know it's,
And are there any alternatives that are not presented here tonight
Right.
that you want to have analysis for?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I think we're at a little bit of a breaking point here. I mean, we've been hearing from residents on the water and sewer bills that are exorbitant. And, you know, for the past several years, we've been applying a strategy that we thought would be effective. And, you know, it's
a catching up strategy.
It's catching
and
up strategy.
We're still chasing it,
And we're,
seems.
and, you know, it's, if we just do 8% this year and then 11%, and it is just building and building and building. So looking at, you know, the next 4 or 5 years of, you know, 10% increases without an end to that, I don't know. I just feel like we need a different strategy. I don't know what that is. And maybe looking under the hood a little bit in some of our capital investment, it's these numbers at this point were kind of unexpected for me, and I know that it's not on your control, right? It's, you know, how the water usage is and what we need, but I can't imagine that other communities that are similarly situated are you know, for a decade having 10% increases every year, you know, which is what we've been seeing. So for a period of time, we were just kind of rolling over some of these small increases, and it was going fine and everything. And then we just got very used to these large and very sharp increases. And they're significant because it's, you know, if you do 10% one year and then 10% next year, it's 10% increase over that 10%, right? So it's it's concerning. I don't have a solution, but I do have a lot of concern for us just strategically. So you can talk more about it.
Matt, do you see other communities with the same rate of increase in expenses?
I can think of one community where they had really high ones, but it was kind of an extenuating circumstance for them because they're thinking about connecting the MWRA and they had to raise a lot of revenue in order to make that happen. But in terms of what we see annually, probably not quite as high as what we're showing here.
So when you look at us in comparison to other communities and you're familiar with our P&L, what do you see as the major influencers on that? Is it our capital expenditure plan, or is it just our overhead operating per hectare is more, or what's the deal?
The first thing that pops in my head is what happened with the MWRA sewer increase the last few years, because that was unexpected, and it did end up going a lot. Those were some very high increases that really hit the rates. And
so would you say other communities then had better, the MWRA had done a better job more accurately metering their sewer, then we get smoked by a big surprise of 50% or whatever that was? Because it doesn't seem, you know what I mean? Like it seems like if they were doing a poor job, we the only community they were doing a poor job with metering. Because if they weren't, and every community was having a poor job, and they woke up one day and the MWRA figured out, hey, we're doing a bad job, we're going to smash every community with a huge increase, then everybody's rates should be going up. So I'm trying to figure out why we're an outlier, because we didn't just connect to the MWRA. It's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but what's the explanation behind it? And, you know, Mike, to your point, like, how are we going to collapse this a little bit? Because, you know, if you get natural gas bill and you live around here, it's doubled in a year.
MWRA took advantage. They found a weak spot. They put in a meter. That's how I started coming into town. I mean, they put it in 3 years ago or whatever. They found a manhole that had a huge amount of inflow coming in. I took advantage, put the meter in, and didn't say anything else. Didn't say anything to the community.
So we had no time to prepare.
So now we are fixing that manhole now as part of our construction project this summer. But that's the biggest link where it changed. They put the meter in and it changed all the calculations.
So now what have we for 3 years for that to average out once you've completed that?
Averages out and then stops it.
So then we'll look at this pricing strategy. We should be thinking like, okay, well, then we should see a decrease in that element of the expense.
To 7-ish.
But there's also a capital component to the MWRA cost, so it's hard for us to project what the MWRA capital piece will be over the next.
true.
I mean, it's yeah.
But there should be some benefit. I mean, because otherwise we wouldn't do the I&I.
Oh, I mean, there's
Right.
absolutely
Okay.
a benefit to
But
that,
once
to
we
removing
finish-
I&I,
Once we
100%.
finish that
Yeah.
manhole, finish the construction this summer, we're gonna go back and petition the MWA to reassess their calculation of how they do it now, but they weren't really receptive with us when we told them we're fixing it and that it should be reassessed, but we'll push for it.
Now, wouldn't you think, though, like to John's point, did they just decide to do it to us because?
No, I mean, when we talk to them, it's a system-wide plan, right? It's just.
They must be doing it
can't-
everywhere, you would think. Maybe it just hasn't caught up yet in terms of the 3 years.
It's a huge system and they just found a weak spot, so they just gotta, it's a matter of finding it in all the other communities, yeah.
And we're only a partial community, partial MWRA.
Yep.
We should be telling them where else to go then.
I'd like to, yeah.
Look at Bill's backyard. Just kidding. Okay.
I wish we had the answers. I just don't have them all.
Do we want to have Matt, Leanne, Bob give us the 7 or 8% increase math for next week?
Yes. I think
It
it's
seems like a 7% and 8%.
We had this, option one had,
Had 6.7 something, so that's almost 7.
option one had this one here.
Yeah,
This is kind of in the
6.7.
ballpark of what you just said.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So in that has the 15% in FY '27.
But that's based on the analysis right now, and if it's a strong revenue year, that number will go down.
But
And you
if
still
it's a
can't
wet
predict the
year,
weather?
it could be worse.
I'm sorry?
You still can't predict the weather?
I can't predict. it. Can you predict?
And so maybe two things. So we'll call that the 7%, an 8%, we have a 9%, and some back of the envelope of meter size, some options for the larger meter size. Maybe some comparison communities, Matt. If it's 30, 35 user fee, here, what would we look to charge? What might the options be? And I get it could be small money, but if we can do the billing that way and we have a pretty close to accurate count, what are the options of meter sizes? Because where could we grow that?
Okay.
And that would help us. And if you factor into your analysis, I mean, again, if it moves it by $30,000, hey, that accounts for, one wet week in July. But
So did you say come back with 7%, 8, and
8 and 9,
Okay.
and some options on meter size,
Yeah.
monthly fees, and anything else?
The only- I just want a sense of like the capital plan as well, what the actual investment is over the next.
Yeah, that would be
years, you know?
helpful too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Know specifically what's included in there?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, those outlays per year and then on what things. So they give a 5-year plan.
We have a capital plan.
We, is it correct in my memory that we can't increase, we have to provide the same increase to all users, but could we look at increasing
Different tiers.
Different
We talked about
tiers.
that, yep. Matt and I were talking about it earlier, and
Something that definitely could be done, but we just have to make sure we have the data that allows us to do it. Because up until this point, we just look at it across all tiers, because that's historically what's happened in this town the last several years.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
So you're saying that there would be a higher percent increase depending which tier you're in?
Or we
No.
do a adjustment to the, the higher tiers, so
Individual.
at some point it's, if you're using a ton of water, that we start to capture.
So,
that might be a higher percent increase than the first and second tier.
so how many tiers are there right now for residents? You have 3, for example, so
We
maybe,
did that in 2019 as well. I think that was those increases that we made on kind of the higher users.
But we've always applied the same percentage to each tier, though.
Yeah, no, and my question would be, I think maybe to what Mike's saying happened in 2019, is can we do sort of a adjustment to the tiers, and then can still do that single percentage adjustment, but in saying...
Create like a fourth tier? Is that what you're thinking?
No, like in the, does
Or
the
just
third
shift
tier...
So it's 0 to 15,
Yeah,
and then 16 to 30, and then 45 plus.
Are you suggesting that maybe tier 1, I'm just going to throw out numbers, goes up 5%, tier 2 goes up 10%, tier 3 goes up 15%? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Theoretically, I'm not saying like let's present a complex increase across tiers, but do we look at it and say, okay, and for FY26, we're going to adjust tier 3 to like X amount, and yeah, so I guess, and then it's whatever 6% increase to the other, but then in subsequent years it would be it's a 6% increase and it applies across all the tiers. So we're just doing an adjustment in sort of the per unit rate at a single tier at the same time.
That would have to be probably a project in terms of, Matt presenting a proposal, and us trying to figure out, how we're going to get to that information and how we'd analyze it.
The Crystal report.
Just to change the percent for each tier?
Well, we have to see how many, like a Crystal report.
Yeah.
So I have the one for 24 that we just completed.
Right.
But, yeah, I don't know what that would entail.
If we were to do different percentages by tier, you wouldn't need a deep dive like Leanne is talking about. You would just need usage by tier, total usage by tier.
Right.
Of course, that's, if you were to use those numbers, then you got to hope those numbers do come true when you estimate your revenues.
Yeah.
But what Leanne's talking about is if you were to change the tiers, like if you were to change the tier breaks.
Which I don't think is what you're saying.
That was not,
You're
yeah,
saying
that was not what I'm
that tier
suggesting.
1 has a 5% increase, tier 2 has a 10% increase, and tier 3 has a 20%. I'm just whatever.
Right, yeah, something like that. And also I'm looking at Ken, and I'm like, also theoretically, then this is encouraging people to conserve resources if we get to.
But
Which is
not too much,
not great
'cause
for
we need our
revenue,
money.
but
Right.
for the environment, and I don't like that those are in conflict.
It does keep your MWA assessment down if you don't use a lot of water, so it does have some positive.
Ah, there you go. Okay. Anything else?
Okay.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Okay. Ken, are you still here? There you go. Sorry, you were behind Matt.
All the stragglers.
I knew you were there, but I was like, did he disappear? All right. We have this information in our packet. We need to sign this agreement. It seems like it's been a while, so.
It's been a while.
If you have any, mojo with Eversource and you can get some pressure on that Mystic school transformer, we're going to need one at Lynch at some point. We should just rally all of our resources to getting things delivered to our town as timely as we can.
If only we had a whisperer somewhere.
I'm looking at you, Ken. It's not you. Who is it?
Been calling Eversource every 2 or 3 days on this project for months, so.
Don't stop when this is done. Start calling on the Mystic School. We'll just
Yeah.
end Lynch. But,
Just
okay.
start showing up.
I'm kind of half kidding, also half serious. But go ahead, if you could give us the update on the charges across the street, that'd be great.
The elaborate lawn ornaments across the street that have been there for the last several months. Yeah, so this is what I hope will be the final paperwork that we're asking the town to authorize signing for to get Eversource to come in and do the last piece of work required. As you can tell from just looking there, the vast majority of the work is done. Not only are the chargers installed and waiting to be electrified, but the transformer's been installed, the distribution box, a lot of underground conduit is in place. All that's left is a piece of wire going from the street where Eversource brought right to the curb, the existing power, through existing conduit to the transformer, and then they need to plug a meter in to the distribution box, and then that's it. So we were
waiting for their a crew to be available just to do that small amount of work. And then at the last minute, we were told that there was one last license that needed to be signed. That's what's in front of you right now. What it says is that essentially is that Eversource would get to maintain their infrastructure. It's our property, but their equipment, if it breaks, if it needs repair or even replacement in the future, that we would allow them to do that. They would maintain sufficient insurance in case something went wrong when they were doing that work, and that if we told them to move their infrastructure for some reason, that we would have to pay for it, the cost of doing so, and not them. Other than that, this is the same project that you've seen numerous times over the last 3 years. And hopefully this will be the final step before scheduling a crew to finish it up.
Okay.
So Ken, since I don't have an electric car, I'm going to ask a question that,
yeah.
Do we charge for the use of this?
Good question. Yeah, so the way we structured this project is different from any of the existing public chargers in town in that we will charge. We're still, I've been in discussions with Flow, which is the company that we purchased the chargers from with grant funding, and that will be operating and maintaining the chargers at no cost to the town for the next 3 years. And, I think we're going to end up somewhere in the around 50 cents per kilowatt hour that the charge will be. There'll be no cost or benefit to the town from that. Flow is looking to hopefully at least break even on the cost of people charging there, and we'll be evaluating that periodically. But around 50 cents a kilowatt hour is common in the region for high-speed DC fast charging stations. So we're intending for this, and have intended from the beginning for this to be, no cost to the town, at least for the 3-year contract that we can sign, and then we'll reevaluate at the end of those 3 years.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the chargers on Laraway, and we have another at the high school, right? At Skillings?
Yep, and some right
And some here.
Yep.
No one pays for energy?
Correct. You pay for parking at Laraway Road.
Well, not now, but someday.
Not right now, right? Yeah, that is the case.
So free charging.
But the difference between those and this is you would be there for a while to get a short, right? It says like 24 miles for, did I read that correct? For a charge there, and
at a slower charger, you get about 24 miles. So behind Town Hall here, plug in about 24 miles of range per hour of charging, so not very fast. This could give you 100 to 200 miles of range if you park for that same hour. It's more sort of intended to be kind of a gas station experience, better for someone who's maybe in an apartment building a distance away who doesn't want to leave their car parked away from home for overnight. They can, top off in 20 minutes.
So in my ongoing quest to monetize investments that we've made in town,
Yes.
like monetize the transfer station, monetize charging. Like, it's great that we dedicated town land and town resources like yourself to provide an asset and a service, but we should be making 10 cents on the dollar. And I understand we have a vendor who's going to operate it for us and make sure it all works, but after 3 years or in 2 years, what would it look like for us to start to charge and say, okay, can we do a cost sharing with the vendor whose name escapes me as quickly as it came?
Flow.
Flow.
Progressive. Flow.
Thank you. Do they have those arrangements? They keep 75 cents, we get 25 cents. Do they have those with other towns?
Not in this case. This is the first time that Flow, or actually any other company that I'm aware of, has signed a contract to provide high-speed charging stations where the company is responsible for the cost of electricity and maintenance. They handle all of that. They have said from the beginning, and I don't think it was just a negotiating tactic, that they expect they will be losing money on this contract. Their main interest is in gaining more market share and visibility in the New England region. It's a Canadian company that is still sort of breaking in. We could, during the 3 years, we could attempt to renegotiate the contract. We'd have to negotiate a new contract at the end of 3 years. But generally, you can't. If you were to charge enough to make a profit, people wouldn't use the stations. They'd go elsewhere just because the price per kilowatt hour would be so high. In structuring this contract, we essentially they're taking some risk and we're taking some risk. The Flow's risk is that they lose money, every single month for 3 years on this contract. Our risk is that we might have been able to get some revenue sharing to some degree and foreclose that option in the contract we signed.
And the benefit to us is that we don't own the maintenance of the units.
Right.
Right. So
Totally.
that is
Our
a
risk
cost
is
avoidance
also
for us.
2 parking spaces in a pretty prominent lot that could have been used by town hall employees or others, right? So that's not risk. That's
Impact, yeah.
that's public good that we're giving up. Okay.
So Beth, do you look at that contract?
Yes. Yeah, we worked with town council and Stacy, and it was.
So yes, we have some outs if they underperform. They're trying to get into this region. They decide, this isn't really working out for us. We get lousy service. We can break that contract, right?
Yeah, it's been a while since we've gone through the details of it, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, they had to promise, and it's included in the contract, close to 100% uptime, for example. Okay. And if people repeatedly go there to plug in and they can't get electricity, we can void the contract.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think for some of our earlier installations of the charging stations, way back when, it wasn't economically viable for us to have a vendor come in to have some share in some of the revenue from it. So I think that was a choice when we first started doing it. We first started getting grants to put some of these charging stations in. So, but it is to your point, Michelle. It's time that we start looking towards that now that there are a lot of electric vehicles in high usage in the community, and certainly once we open Laraway Road, or once we get these online, I think we'll start seeing very heavy usage.
Yeah, I mean, we don't give away our water for free. We should maybe not give away. Granted, they're paying for the electricity, but we gave the land. We gave your time.
Yep.
We gave access. I'm not sure we should be in the business of free everything, at least related to this. And I get it, scale, right? We need to this station, that station, there's another place we might put it. If our climate goals are electric vehicles in town, and we want to have more of these places, we should find ways to make 10 cents.
Yeah, and I don't think
25
I don't
cents.
think the cost is a barrier anymore for usage. So,
okay.
Can I just ask 2 questions? So, one is, are these sort of universal chargers at this point, or are they specific to?
Yeah, you will have to download a Flow account onto your smartphone. You will be able to pay with a credit card even if you don't have a Flow account, but it'll be much easier if you have a Flow account. And the charger plug type is the most common plug type outside of Tesla chargers right now, the CCS chargers. It also has the CHAdeMO, a separate cable with the CHAdeMO plug, which is just for Nissan vehicles. But even Tesla drivers will be able to charge there. They just have to have an adapter, which most of them have anyway, because there's a lot of CCS chargers around. So.
And the other is, what was the grant that was used to purchase it? And is that something, as we think about, do we expand a network of electric chargers? Are those available in the future?
Yeah, there were 2 grants that we got for this. One was from the State Department of Environmental Protection Electric Vehicle Incentive Program, or EVIP grant. And then the other one was a Make Ready grant from Eversource. That was most of the money. That was for all the infrastructure and part of the charging stations, and then the EVIP grant was for the rest of the charging stations. And both of those grants still exist. Eversource is currently maxed out in applications for their make-ready grants, but that should hopefully be additional revenue should go into that account over time, and they'll be able to do that. And the EVIP grant is still open for applications right now. So yeah, we should be able to apply in the future.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is this going to disrupt traffic at all as we finish this last bit of work to get these online?
This part shouldn't. It's entirely within, between the curb and the parking lot. And I don't think they'll have to park any vehicles on the road. I think this can all be done from the parking lot side.
Okay. It's a pretty busy intersection.
Right.
That's why.
And we make sure they don't do it during the NCOF fair weekend.
Good point.
Like
Yeah, good point. I
second
mean, I'm
weekend in May.
hoping, in spite of all past experience, that once Beth signs this license, that they'll immediately schedule the work. But who knows?
Yeah. So I think, as we know, I mean, we have, Glendarty Road Race, Spirit Weekend, NCA,
Yep.
Town Day. It just can't be any of those. I mean, it can be a Tuesday during those weeks, but it can't be a weekend or a Friday because we have a lot going on.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I'd question about that is if it could just be essentially two workers walking onto the site with a cable, and
sure
feeding it through. But if they don't need to take up a bunch of parking spaces or anything else,
or disrupt sidewalks,
or
right?
disrupt sidewalks,
or streets. Yeah,
yeah, I would
just keep us posted. But
yeah, if it looked like it was conflicting in any way, I would ask them, what exactly you're going to do and what's it going to look like.
They don't want to be out there during Inca anymore. We want them to be out there during Inca. So I think
right.
Unless they're selling fried dough, they're not welcome.
Yeah.
All right. I move that the Select Board approve the Eversource Transformer License Agreement for the EV charging stations at the Jenks Town Hall parking lot and authorize the town manager to sign the agreement.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Ken.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
Springtown meeting articles. This might be the last piece we need for you, Mr. Tallerman, but Beth, if you want to go through the packet of town
Sure.
meeting articles. We have a new one related to Converse Place, but we'll talk about that as well. But
So in the packet is a list of the proposed articles. You do need to vote your articles before the warrant closes on March 14th. So the intention is to have you vote the article language. The motion language can come later at your meeting on March 10th. Just the first section of articles I have here are the standard articles. So board and committee reports, the water and sewer rates, which we just discussed, acceptance of Chapter 90 funds, rescinding borrowing authorizations if we have any, and then the committee action report, which is typically the last article at town meeting. The next item that's on here is, as you're aware, we have some proposed improvements to the culvert at Everett Ave. We have found out during the course of the design work that culvert is not located on town property, that it is located on private property at the corners. And so we are in the process of getting an appraisal for that property, but we will need either temporary or permanent easements or to do a taking to allow that project to go forward. After discussing with staff this morning, we've made the decision, just given where we are in the appraisal process, that we're recommending that article be moved to fall town meeting, because I think we're just not comfortable going to have enough information in terms of the appraisal and the negotiation process for the easements in time for spring town meeting. So although it's on here, we did, as I said, decide today to pull it for Springtime meeting, and the idea is to bring it forward to fall. And we'll be letting the capital planning committee know that as well. But I think it's important that we flag it as something that we're going to need to work on over the next few months, because there are 4 residential properties that are impacted, and Jay's been very involved in all of that.
That's the Everett Avenue culvert?
Everett Ave culvert, yeah, which is an existing culvert.
Yeah. There's 2 culverts on here.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault.
Is the Everett Ave culvert. Yep. I'm just going down the list here. Morocco culvert, so as we've discussed, there are some additional elements that we are likely going to be required to do related to the construction of the Morocco culvert. We are working right now with permitting agencies, our engineer, and the contractor we have currently on board to price out some work that will involve creating a more permanent structural insert to the existing culvert that's out there. There have been some concerns raised about the integrity of that existing culvert and its ability to remain in good structural condition during construction. So we are currently working with the contractor and our engineering firm to price out what that additional work could look like. It will require, as I mentioned, further permitting, and we have reached out to the various permitting agencies to kind of give them a heads up and have an initial conversation with them. So this article, again, there's more work to be done in terms of the motion that would have the actual value, but this article would be to get additional funding. Capital Planning Committee will be discussing this on Wednesday night as well, and the possibility of co-sponsoring.
Yeah, and I spoke to Capital Planning's chair this afternoon about hopefully co-sponsoring, but we don't have the details.
Yep.
So
good.
Yep.
We also folding in that appropriation what we have to do for that kind of access issue. Do we need the little bit of additional funds?
Yep. Yep. Strategic maintenance account. So this is a continuation of a more or less standard article we've had over the past few years of allocating money, typically $100,000 or $200,000 from free cash, to put in an account that's used to for so-called strategic maintenance work. Last year, this article was co-sponsored by the Select Board, the Town Manager, and the Capital Planning Committee. I'd like to recommend that we do that again this year. The next article was actually a request of our town treasurer. She couldn't be here tonight. Hopefully will be able to be here on the 10th if the board has any questions. But this is to adopt Chapter 200A, Section 9A, disposition of abandoned funds. So she provided a brief memo in the packet. And Jay, I don't know if you have any further background.
It's just, it avoids a lengthy process that we otherwise normally have had to go through. It just allows us to account for them and get them dealt with a lot easier. The state gave us a new tool, so we have to accept it.
How many are we late to the game or early to the game on adopting this?
Average. We saw a few towns do it, but we're average. We're probably on the early front half.
Okay. So it'll be good if Ann can be here.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good idea on paper, and if there's
There's no downside whatsoever. It's not an expense or anything. It's all about just a little bit of convenience. I don't even know why they made it an acceptance statute.
Okay.
And then the last article was a request of Mr. Betancourt. I don't know, Mike, if you want to.
Oh, yeah. So, thanks, Beth. One of the things we've heard, especially a lot recently, is questions about the literacy issues that we've seen in the schools, and there's been a lot of surveys. So I've been working with some school committee members and superintendent to put together a request for $100,000 toward professional development for teachers for literacy. So it would be a pilot to respond to their request to invest in more outside professional development, which they see as higher quality and more involved than something that is, inside the school district. And it would inform us as we are starting the State of the Town Committee and anticipating a general override over probably the next year or so about where we need to invest more to resolve some of the issues that have been identified with that. So, and I know, Jay, we've got to talk a little bit about the details of that, and they're starting to come together a little bit, but probably need to do that soon, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I think it always gets a little tricky when we do, outside of the operating budget, additional funds for educational operating budget.
I guess that's my question. I don't expect you to answer this. Why isn't this showing up under the schools? I mean, I'm for it. Yeah. But it just seems like it should be all the schools, and then they make this ask and say, this is why we want this, and FinCom can say, well, can you afford it? And I just don't. And is this something we typically do?
Yeah, 'cause I don't want to do any of this the wrong way at all.
Right. We're all for think it's a good idea. It's just what bucket does it belong in? That's my point. That's all.
Yeah, I mean,
if it's the, how it's being allocated through the school budget, through our budget, through free cash, through a warrant article by us versus the school committee, how it's specifically being allocated and everything else. Like, I am just very nervous that if we do one wrong step here, it creates more problems for what is already a big problem. So I want to take extreme caution here because I want to make sure this is done and done right.
So I don't see it as a right or wrong. I think there's policy questions around it that you all have to decide. That the thing that Mike and I have been talking about is if it is school operating, it essentially, schools are a bottom line budgeting. So if they're on board and they're willing to you give us money, we are going to dedicate it for this purpose, for this fiscal, great, but we can't dictate that. It's like every other element of the school budget. We can't segregate an operating budget unless schools weren't operating it. So it's going to go into their hopper, and there's a degree of confidence they're going to use it for the intended purpose. It, in a way, is if it's outside of their normal budgeting, then maybe they don't consider it in terms of how it looks next year. If it's one-time funds, maybe it gets absorbed into their operating budget for next year. I just wanted clarity to make sure everyone understood. We can't tell them what to do when town meeting votes in favor of it. It goes into their operating budget.
Yeah, and as I said, I've been working collaboratively with them, so they're obviously not opposed to this. It gives us a higher level of collaboration as we're going into the override to say this worked, this didn't work, we need to fund at this level, this needs to increase professional development there. And so it'll give us I think some of the information that we need moving forward. And
But this is kind of my worry too, because I've also been talking to the school committee and some of them were surprised by this and they have problems with it. And I don't want to have that running up at the town meeting. This is something I do think is a good idea, but we have to get the whole school committee on board with us so it's hand in hand. That's, I think, what my big comment and fear here is that if this isn't fully nailed down, if the school committee isn't fully on board, and they're clearly not, because you've been told something different than what I've been told, we got to make sure we're taking the right approach here.
So two things. I agree, and we should probably hear from schools, and we have time. And the other thing is, like I did with FinCom on other committees, Mike is sponsoring this as him. Yep. We will take a position as the five of us. So unless there's interest in it being a select board article that we have satisfied our concerns, we've heard from schools, we want to do it and get our names on it and not Mike's names on it. I think that's a different conversation. But Mike can proceed with this as an individual member. So I agree. We want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure it's all kind of like vape detectors in the high school. Are we all good with this? But it can get on the warrant.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to be angry about it. I mean, I think it's just
no one's angry.
No
one's angry. That's cool.
I feel hostility, Bill. So I don't.
It's not hostility, Mike. It's more a little surprise because there's two other members of this board who have been aggressively vocal about trying to help with the literacy program. And we're going to do that only if we work together as a team. And so coming out of, seeing something for the first time on our agenda was a bit of a surprise and caused a bit of a scramble to try and get some more information and everything else. And we can't risk that when we're dealing with something as important, not only of the literacy curriculum in our school, but also the financial situation of our town. And this is a perfect intersection of both. So I want to work with you on this. I want to work with the full school committee on it. And I think that's the most important thing moving forward because we'll find the most success working together. So just please involve me in these discussions. Involve Anthea. I'm sure she wants to be involved.
I think we've all been involved with the literacy issue, and I think in different ways. So I think I
But
think
then
we
how
just
come you
need
didn't
solutions.
ask me about this?
Yeah, I mean, to what it sounds like, I don't think there's
I'm just gonna sit
hostility.
back. This is pretty good.
I think
I
I think
don't
there's
even
surprise,
understand. I don't
and I
even
think
understand.
when you preface it by saying, "I've been talking to the school committee and the superintendent," and you come in as yourself with this, when in our last meeting, I mean, anyone who watched our last meeting would know that you had support of at least 3 members of the board for, some sort of increase to the school's budget. I think, 2 weeks ago we were talking about the budget before the budget was submitted and finalized. And so to Bill's point, if we want to be successful in in moving forward investment in the literacy curriculum, then why don't we consider doing that as a joint article between the select board and the school committee?
We are.
Why does it say Michael Bennett?
It has your name on it. So just to clarify,
Well, it has to start
I can-
somewhere.
Yeah, so I have to.
And it didn't start with me.
A lot of those articles start that way, right?
Yeah.
And then we work with the different stakeholder groups. And as I've said over the years, my goal is always to get as many co-sponsors as possible, right? Because I think that is what our job is, right? And things change, things get postponed, things evolve. So that's my goal. But I think just to kickstart it, I think we've heard a lot of frustration from a lot of community members around this issue. And that particular issue around professional development is what, I think a lot of people saw as the request coming from teachers, and I want to support that. And so, and I also want to have some information as we develop the state of the town committee and we start advocating for a general override next year. So what we're doing now, talking about it, is the job. That's the exercise, right? I can't call you and talk about it and call Thea and talk about it, right? I talked to the chair, so the door was closed there until we come into a meeting. I assumed that it would be something that you would support. Obviously, the devil's in the details, and we'll work it out, and I look forward to doing that. But
Mike, I think your motivation here was to make sure this gets funded. You didn't want it to get lost in the school budget just in case, right?
Right, and the other piece of it is, and I shared with the schools as well, is there will be information that we'll need to receive as part of this a little bit differently than we don't typically have our a laser focus on the professional development that's going on in schools, right? That's there. So we just want some information saying what worked, what didn't. Do we need to increase this? Do we need to decrease it? But be responsive to what the teachers are saying the need is. And the other piece that I said is that if it's not spent or any isn't spent, it'll revert to the general fund rather than revert to the school budget, right?
But that's the trickier part.
Yep.
Because the school budget is the general fund.
Yep.
But if it goes into their budget and they decide not to use it, it stays in their budget.
Well, we can talk about how we do it.
That's fine. I'm not jumping into the fray at all. Just from an accounting perspective, once it goes in, it's on their bottom line.
Yep.
We can consider it separately in kind of an a la carte approach, and see how it goes. But if we choose to supplement their operating budget, then their bottom line is increased by that. And because we don't determine their line items, as long as they're on board and everyone trusts that they're going to use it for the intended purpose, great. Otherwise, then, it could end up funding other parts of their budget. It won't ever come out of education this fiscal.
Yeah, and this is a short window of time, really. It would be from, June through, February of March the following year once we go into the override, and certainly can extend longer than that. And what my understanding is, it is a cost issue, that outside professional development that is the highest quality is hard to get, and it's expensive, and the schools haven't been funded well enough over the years to support that. So if we've identified that as a major issue, and we have, I'd like to at least do a pilot and see if there's progress there to inform us if we need to really start investing heavily in it. So that's the ultimate goal here. And it's right. We haven't even fleshed anything out yet, so it's in early stages.
So just as a couple things. One, if this were to be a joint article between the select board and the school committee at our next meeting, if we could have information and support from the superintendent, the school committee. What would $100,000 to literacy PD and support look like? I mean, what lead time does the school committee need to put in, PD in August with a new infusion of money? What would, is that going to UFly? Is it going to some sort of other program? I'm sure that in the CES report that they have and in the information that's been received, that something could be very clear and actionable as a professional development piece, but I would like the school committee, or the superintendent rather, to be able to be a proponent of that and share what are the things that are specifically needed. And I know there is a pilot in place in terms of looking at curriculum in some classrooms. So part of that challenge is then identifying, is that in fact the right curriculum, and are we doing professional development towards the appropriate curriculum, or is our professional development going, and is our professional development going towards something else? The report, pretty clearly laid out a gap in MTSS, which is tiered support for students, which is, curriculum agnostic. So is it going to something like that, which is filling a gap, which does directly address literacy instruction? It's just also a broader thing. Having that kind of context, kind of just tying back to Jay's point, we put $100,000 towards the school budget. If it's meant for literacy PD and it's not all user, just what does that look like? So, I mean, I'm fully on board with increasing the budget for the schools and around literacy and around PD, but I would like more context for our meeting on the 10th when we'd be voting on this.
Yeah, and part of that context is some idea of how much the literacy initiative requires. Because I do have fear that if we do it only partially, it undercuts the larger effort. And so if this is one step, we need to understand that, and everybody else understands that, so that there isn't a misconception that $100,000 solves this problem. Because it's not going to. It's going to be a lot more than that. And we need to make sure that we're going to address this entire thing from A to Z, pun intended, and not accidentally sell ourselves short with something which is only a Band-Aid. So, a lot of what you said, Mike, came straight out of my mouth when we were talking about the budget just, I think, at our last meeting. So I'm fully on board to help you with this, but let's do it together and make sure we're doing it holistically, because it's too important for anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's my intention. It's takes a little while to put these things together and get them going, have conversations with people, having conversations with the superintendent, who's certainly supportive.
Did you talk to the superintendent about this?
Of course.
Okay, do you have a record that you could forward to us? Because I would love to see
record of
this.
my phone call?
No, if it was a phone call, then you don't. No. But, I mean, I'll call Frank tomorrow and ask him to try and give me a download about what you guys discussed, because I don't want to be behind anybody on this. I want to be side by side with you. And so if you have a conversation, if you learn something, please share it with all of us. It's too important.
I think we will. I think
I don't.
Let's get an update. I'm not sure you need to call Frank to understand what you talked to Mike about. Let's get an update. Let's see what the support is. And yeah, we have to, it's the 10th is when we meet. The warrant closes on the 14th. It can be on the warrant, as fleshed out as it is. We decide then if we're sponsoring it or Mike is, but I don't know that you need to spend time, Bill, understanding what Frank's good with. You can certainly send him an email, that's fine, but let's get those answers, because I think they're the right answers, because nobody wants to throw good money at a problem that's critical And I think
Yeah.
Mike knows that, so.
And part of it is, I attended the Mass Municipal Association annual conference beginning of January, which was excellent. But, I also connect with a lot of people I know that are select boards, that are town managers, that are on finance committees throughout the Commonwealth. And I think there is a lot of buyer's remorse of people who threw money at the literacy program and whether it be curriculum or other solutions, and didn't get the outcome that they wanted, especially when ARPA was available, right? And so my concern is that we're going to be putting out a pretty big ask of the community probably a year from now, and having some of this information, I think will be helpful. And I told the superintendent and school committee members, I have no sense of ownership of this. If somebody wants to take it over, take my name off of it, Bill, if you want to put your name on instead, I don't care. I'm not, not looking for anything but a solution to a problem that has been identified, and that I feel like needs some more attention. That's it, but I certainly will provide as much information as I can moving forward, and certainly for our next meeting.
Okay. More to come.
Do you want me to reach out to the superintendent for additional information, or are you as board members going to do that and bring it to the next meeting?
What's the best way of making sure everybody's getting the same information? Because that's really what we should do.
Well, we could have, I don't think it's everybody calling all the school committee and everybody calling the superintendent. What we do with normal articles is we bring them before the board. We have information that we present, and go from there. It's, we part of it is that with the open meeting law, it's a little bit tricky for all of us to be talking all the time about something that we're going to be voting on in the future. So I can certainly push information to Michelle and Beth, and we can provide that to everybody as we go along. And I think that's just how we normally do
I think
things,
that's what we
right?
have to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
When is the next school committee meeting? I think they're on Thursdays now.
I'll have to look at the calendar.
Let's see if there's one this week.
I just, is that something that they'll be discussing? Will you be, going to their public comment to raise it? Thursdays at 6:30. Because I think it would, is that something they'll have on their agenda or not? It looks like they meet on Thursday of this week. So.
The 27th?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's Thursday.
So, I had discussed to be in attendance at the school committee's subcommittee, finance, on Wednesday to discuss this. Like I said, I've already discussed it with multiple school committee members, and to see if there are any issues with it, and if there's suggestions, if there's continued support. It will evolve, I'm sure, be on their agenda at some point in the near future. So,
Okay. Send us an update after that subcommittee meeting, or send it to Beth, and we'll get it out.
yeah, and certainly will.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know if the subcommittee, how much it's been previously discussed, but if the subcommittee wants, they probably have all of 12 hours to add it to their agenda for Thursday, but, I'd be happy to see it if the chair was amenable to it, to see it on their agenda for Thursday as well.
Thursday this week? Is that when yeah, I don't know if it'll be ready at that point, but we'll certainly ask, see when they think it's appropriate to be on.
Yep. Okay. Anything else for Springtown meeting besides potentially Converse Place? Nothing new came up today?
We've got general bylaws out there still that that committee is working on.
Bylaws.
But it's very much work in progress. There are 2 public meetings on that, one tomorrow at
Every
6
Tuesday?
and one
Yes.
next Monday I believe. I've been looking at their drafts so far and returning red lines. It's an ambitious project that they have. So we'll see what.
So Jay, because it's a code of bylaw, right? The article has to be the actual changes to the bylaw.
It's got to be more than the warrant has to include it.
Right. So whereas we kind of have a little bit of breathing room between the article and the motion, their motion should, in essence, be the same as their article.
They're cutting it very close. They're also reviewing a lot. My guess is it'll shrink in terms of what they want to do, or maybe they'll push it all to the fall, which might make it a little bit more palatable, give everyone a little bit more time to weigh in, because there's a lot to it.
Yeah, and I reached out to the chairs of that dissenting review this afternoon to ask them to come to our meeting on the 10th. If there are changes being voted on, that have been voted on by government regs, being proposed to town manager duties, comptroller duties, select board appointments, select board duties, anything and everything that affects our direct reports or how we appoint.
And that's a chapter they haven't even drafted yet.
Yep. So if we know something or see something, it will get into our packet. That was the ask, have it in Beth's hands by close of business Thursday to go out to the packet Friday for March 10th. I hope we'll see something, but we'll see.
We'll see.
It'll be difficult to take a position on something that might change, duties without having even had a chance to debate it. Number one, debate it internally, but I actually understand the context. So, more to come.
I think they're having a meeting tomorrow and they're voting on what they're going to put forward.
I don't think they're going to be. They might take some partial votes tomorrow. I think they're hashing things out still. It's possible.
It's what's on the agenda.
It is, but then it's 2 nights, so that they may wait until the end of next week's proposed meeting that they have on the 3rd before doing it. But I don't know. I've been asked to speak at both of them. I only gave them comments to about half of the chapters because I just got them Friday or Thursday.
You just got the proposed revisions last Thursday?
About that, I think it was. I had previously responded to a number of comments, but no drafts. So that was when I got them. So I wanted to turn around as much as I could for them.
Okay. Just a matter of process. This is a question, I think, for Jay and less so for Beth, but maybe we could ask Mary Ellen. There is an expectation, we heard it, we were there February 4th, right? Was that there would be, outside of this public meeting, which is every Tuesday, a public hearing. There were a committee of the town meeting, so is that a moderator question as to when will their public hearing on these changes be scheduled?
Not a moderator question.
It's just directly to the chairs?
But is there a requirement for a public hearing?
No, but there was an expectation set, and I think a commitment.
It would be in the manager's hearing.
Okay.
But,
I think it would be wise for them to look. They've been soliciting input from department heads and board heads. I know that from reviewing the drafts, but I don't think there's been a public hearing.
Not this board head yet, though.
Right.
Yeah. Board yet, but that's fine. Maybe it's
that's
coming.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. So maybe it might be a good suggestion.
And I don't know if tomorrow they're taking public comment.
Okay.
I don't know. They might be.
I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
But we did hear that expressed pretty clearly, so
right.
We'll see when that happens in March. It all kind of has to happen in March. Warrant closes, motions are due.
Or it happens in the fall.
Yeah, well, okay. We'll see how ready they are. But if you find out something on our chapters or town manager, comptroller, I think
They did have one on the town. They had one minor change on the town manager chapter of the bylaws, or it was a section, but it was minor. Is my memory? I'm kind
Can
of
you make
swimming
sure
in
you
it
send that
this
to
morning.
us so we can make sure it gets in the packet?
You were this group. Well, I think Beth was copied for sure on my.
Okay, we'll make sure it gets
sent today back to them.
Yes.
Yeah. Before I forwarded it.
Okay, let's make sure we get in the packet for the 10th then.
Right.
All right.
Beth, if you want to minor bit of economy, we don't need a Chapter 90 article. But I know that most towns still have them as a vestige, but so if it ends up just being kind of consent anyway, then it's fine.
usually is.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be a lot of
Just trying to
articles in
save
Springtown meeting.
Save a few seconds of town meeting. Every moment is
There'll be a
precious.
lot.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the next thing, and we'll just report out for the good of the order, that we signed the LDA, the official 21st Amendment to the LDA for Washington and Swanton, or at least voted to sign. There might be some minor Scrivener's errors to be handled by the town manager, but we're in a position, I think, to move forward. And Beth, I don't know if you want to add more on that, but
No, I think it's good news to take what's an important piece of property for the town and move it forward through development.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Beth and Jay, and certainly Liz Leiden, counsel on this. This has been a long way to get to this next stage, and hopefully we'll pick up some momentum moving forward with it as well. I think when we deal with a lot of this stuff in executive session, I don't think people see how much goes into it to get to this point of executing an LDA, and this was a big one. This was what, the 21st Amendment on it, or
Yeah.
That's a lot. These aren't one-page amendments. It's very complicated, and Brian Melanson and his group worked well with us on it as well. So we look forward to continuing on to the next stage.
and we can probably share that update at town meeting, now that we shared it today. But, okay, the next topic is not going to take long, I don't think. Winchester's 175th anniversary. I was asked to add that to the agenda. Beth had shared some activities that are being scheduled related to Town Day. Thank you, Jay. Town Day and Spirit Day and Cultural Council. So we don't need to decide tonight, but the thought is it is our 175th. If the select board wants to get behind any specific activities or events, we should think about, during what season we want to do that and what might that look like. I'm not sure I want to be a party planner, but maybe Anthea would love to be a party planner. But where do we want to? I don't know.
Just for the record, women don't need to be the only party planners.
Nope. I wasn't suggesting that, but I was like, hey, if you've planned your kids' parties, perhaps it's a good thing. Bill would love to be a party planner, but
I'm a great party planner.
no, I think it's just a question. So thank you, Beth, for all the activities. If there's some things on, town land and uses, we would vote on anyway, like we would do for any, town day or other activities. But if there are things that we think, and just in talking to other towns and seeing what other people have done, we're not Lexington. We can't claim the shot heard around the world. But is there something we want to take, proclamations, declarations, select board motions as we're moving kind of into the spring? I think we should just kind of have that. Maybe this can be in the agenda, every other meeting, and see if we coalesce around an event, an activity, a proclamation. I don't know. But I think that was my thought. I don't know if others have thoughts on that, or if it's a surprise, but that's our seal, and there it is, 1850.
Yeah, and the last time we had this celebration, I think for the 150th, we did quite a bit of work, and there was a large committee, and so I think it makes sense for select board members to be a part of it. It's not something that we're going to be in charge of. We also have visitors maybe along that timeline coming from Saint-Germain-en-Laye, our sister city, and so a lot of the coordination through that will, I think, produce a pretty good celebration. So I'll reach out to some of these groups as well to see if they need anything from us, and certainly it's not a select board initiative, but anybody's welcome to jump in. And help.
Yep.
John is going to have some free time, and so it makes sense.
I think you could be the parade
I
marshal.
actually think John would be a great party planner.
I don't know why I actually skipped. That was just a bad idea. He has the time now.
Isn't that why he's stepping down?
Can you see with a big old stick? He could be the front of the parade. I don't know what I was thinking. So anyway, maybe more to come on that, but we just wanted to sort of raise it up. It's almost March. We're going to be kind of in it, and it's going to be busy. So if there's things that need to be done before the Springtown meeting, we should probably, have people responsible or have a plan. So that was the thought on that. Okay. Next up, State of the Town Committee. We've talked about this since our budget summit on January 10th. We talked about this the last two times we've talked about the budget. So I think we need to get the State of Town Committee going. We all received a memo from FinCom, and now I think everyone at town meeting has received a memo about, potential impact on reserves, our impact on operating expenses, and asked for the chair and vice chair to sit down with the chair and vice chair of school committee and FinCom. We're actively working to schedule that with the schools have given us some dates. I don't know where FinCom is on that, but so those are just some initial conversations on probably this year's budget, but we have to get broader, right, for like longer term planning. So I'd like us, we have materials which I can make sure get into our next packet that Lance Grenzbeck shared from 2018, 2019. I shared it, Bill had asked, so it's the spreadsheet that Stacy still uses for a 5-year plan, the PowerPoint that was at Springtown meeting. But the charge is generally, what is it that we need? What are the wants? What are the needs? What will it cost? And then all the impacts on households, which is where FinCom usually runs multiple models. So I think we should get started, at least say it out loud today. There could be some meetings that we're following up on with FinCom at their request in schools in the next few weeks or maybe the next month. But going forward, the State of the Town Committee, we should probably dedicate 2 of ourselves to it. And it might be certainly a year-long effort. It could be longer. So
yeah, I'm happy to help that one. I think it was extremely successful last time. It was a lot of work. I mean, I think there were 50 or 60 different spreadsheets, iterations of it in order to kind of get to consensus where we were, and then even after that, numbers changed, and I think that what the strategy one was in setting this up, and Lance's idea is to really communicate to residents that we have a structural deficit, and we will need to be doing these general overrides for the operating budget every several years, whatever it is, however much it is. And it's not because anybody made a mistake or things aren't planned very well. We just got our AAA credit rating reaffirmed.
Oh.
On the business side, we're doing well. It's just this is the nature of the beast, especially when we see the investment that we need to make in our schools, the largest part of our budget. We want to get it right. So look forward to that process.
Okay.
I'm also happy to volunteer for that one.
Okay. You don't get a role, but maybe you can be a focus group member for us.
Yeah, ad hoc member, sort of fun.
So like Pepsi or Coke.
And it is pretty open, right? I mean, anybody can go, anybody can be involved. There's not really votes being taken on things, right? It's just bringing.
It's a working group.
It's a working group. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So I think I'll stay involved with it as well.
Yep.
Having been on FinCom and having done my own override budget actually in 2018, because I did, I even have my own spreadsheets. So, but we'll.
Was that you in 2018?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had my own. Dave Arico had his.
Oh, right.
Yeah. It was like, oh, but just wait, there's one more budget. I was like, okay.
Was there a battle of the spreadsheets and I wasn't invited?
I didn't know you then. Did you even live here? You might have. I just didn't know you.
I did live here.
I didn't know you then.
It was a big battle.
It was a big battle of the spreadsheets. There were literally 3 of them.
Yep.
Mine lost. It's okay. I was close. But, all right, so, no kidding. It was battle of spreadsheets. Let me get the information out into the packet, I think, of what the deliverables might look like. And usually it starts with a small working group of kind of core school committee, finance committee, select board members, and then get into capital. And then we have broad, department heads come in. Beth, right? Obviously we'll need the comptroller will have to be involved. And then just other stakeholders. We had just people from the community. I know I came to a few meetings just with my own ideas. So there'll be a public process as we move probably after town meeting, but we'll start to sort of socialize like the goals in a time frame, I think before Springtown meeting. But we're gonna have a lot of focus on a lot of articles come Springtown meeting. So does that sound good? I mean, do people want to accelerate that, or am I missing anything? I'm just looking for
My
feedback.
question would just be if we could consider sort of posting those as select board meetings?
I think we can.
So
If-
that we can all be in attendance versus.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I posted all of them when they have.
Before, yeah. So if we get on a regular cadence, I was planning to do so, or certainly Patty can. I just don't know what our frequency is going to be, but absolutely, so people can show up. And I think to Mike's point, we won't be necessarily, the group usually doesn't take positions. I mean, 50-something models later, it's like,
Yep.
make that number go up by 2%. But anyone can come and have a real kind of update in real time.
And ultimately, the question of the override comes before the select board, right? So, and, this is what happened is.
It's to our benefit to know what's going on.
Right, because, to everybody to be involved, because once it hits us, what was recommended initially last time changed substantially to where it went out to the voters. Right?
Yes.
So.
Sure did.
So I think the more that we're in the loop, the better. And it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of work. A lot of it's over the summer, so might not have everybody there every week.
So I know some communities do, when they do like a participatory budgeting and they take applicants to get people, sometimes just like get more engaged because you've applied to it. Is that a consideration for
Absolutely.
some sort of engagement to get people
Yes.
sort of on board?
I'll have to
And
talk.
committed, right, if it's happening over the summer.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's more than just the usual suspects, definitely community members, whether they want to be formally appointed by this board or they show up. But I'll work with, I guess, between Patty and Mary Ellen, and probably us to post that, one or two members. I think they had two or three members at large last time. They may not want to do it again, but we can ask. But absolutely. Make a note of that. Any other thoughts on that approach? Okay. So, doesn't start tomorrow, because other than maybe I'll share some old materials, but it will start soon. All right. Are there any other select board committee updates before we go to town manager review? I think I was going to share the GovRegs update, but we already got that from kind of Jay. Any other updates? This is where you'll probably hear state of the town updates, I suppose, going forward, or it might be a standing agenda item going forward. But anything else that people had? I know I spoke with Capital today. We talked about GovRegs. We talked about co-sponsoring the Morocco culvert. But anybody else?
The Fields Committee is meeting on Wednesday, but my other question would be, there was a meeting on the schools master plan today. Will that meeting come to us once it's available? Is it recorded?
It's supposed to be recorded, and I specifically asked Chris to make that link available to us when it's published. I sent in like 4 questions myself.
It's the enrollment.
The enrollment study,
yeah.
correct. So I guess we can see if our questions got answered. And I have Anthea's questions, I have mine. If we have answers, if I get it, I'll share it. And then if we actually think I'll try to scribe the answers that I heard and share those with you if we heard the same answers. And if we still have outstanding questions, we can always ask schools. So I don't know, but I will follow up with Chris. Or he'll call one of us.
Yeah, it was too bad that it was at the same time. This was the only time where everybody could meet,
Yeah.
getting Donahue there as well. And I think it was wise of you, Michelle, not to postpone our executive session until after, because after it would be probably not our
And it
best
didn't
work.
make a lot of sense for one of us to peel off for 15 minutes and rattle off a bunch of questions. That was the other option, was like one of us goes and says, here's my 5 things, but
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
we needed
and
more time.
Chris is obviously very responsive, so not a concern there.
Okay, any other updates? No, all right. So the next thing is town manager review. So I had sent around to folks today how I want to kind of go through the conversation tonight. We went through Bill, we tasked him in the summer, I think, with this, right? Let's get it.
I think it was after Springtown meeting.
I'm going to call that the summer. It was close to June. You compiled a tool. You had a draft for us in September, October. We didn't take a lot of action on that. And in looking at how other towns have shared feedback with the town manager, it's unfortunate, I think, for Beth and for all of us that we haven't had this in place for a few years, because some towns have year over year, and, comparisons, and we're kind of starting from a baseline of that maybe not even be a complete understanding of what Beth's done. But one thing I will say about the process is the domains of experience that Bill identified were pretty consistent with some of the other towns I looked at in terms of what are the duties and how are they measured. So thank you for that. So tonight I want to have, if Bill wants to talk more about the process, how we compiled some things, I'm going to turn it over to Bill and then highlight some strengths. I'm going to do some areas needing improvement and goals, and then I want to hear from folks here on specific maybe goals looking forward, and then Beth. And I think we're not going to get to next year's goals for Beth tonight, because I don't know that we'll agree on them. And we even need to understand it, what's realistic. Probably not 8 things, maybe it's 2 or 3. But if we're starting to coalesce around some themes, I'm going to ask Patty to describe those, and when we come back in 2 weeks, let's see if we can settle on goals that are achievable and time limited, so that by next January, we can actually see how we did. And I think, John, you made the suggestion a couple meetings back that the chair should sit down with the town manager on a quarterly basis and go over those goals. So I think once we have goals, the chair should sit down and meet with Beth, just to check in on how it's going. And we should all collectively give feedback to the chair to give to Beth. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you. I mean, this was not a process where I really reinvented the wheel. I drew a lot from other towns. I also drew a lot from a town manager evaluation that was done something like 10 years ago. I think for one of your predecessors, it was one of the few documents that was still findable. But through going through the process, I think we also learned that there were some aspects of it that can be revised for the future. Some themes I noticed were just differences between goals for your own personal, professional development and goals for town operational development. And that's a conversation for later. So what Michelle really wanted me to talk about first was the scoring. And I think they came out really right where we would want them to, for the sake of the first time that we've done this in too long, where your average was just shy of a 3. And 3 was supposed to be satisfactory. And me personally, I do not believe in grade inflation. It is a terrible thing. So if you're getting a 3, that means you're doing a good job. Doesn't mean you don't have areas that can be improved upon. But it's a great baseline to start from. And I want to thank everybody who completed the forms and put them in, because it is a tool for you to have something that you can go back to and see and really draw from over the next period before we do this again. And hopefully next year, the feedback is even more specific and you have more concrete suggestions to work off of. You still got some great ones here. So when it comes to the numbers, like I said, no one was really supposed to give you 1s or 5s. They were heavily discouraged. I don't know if anyone did, because none of us have seen anybody else's scores. We wanted this to be blind. There has been some discussion about whether or not we should give you our own personal forms, so you can see exactly what people said. Personally, I'm open to that. If you're open to it, that is something that maybe we can offer you. But really, everything's supposed to be in this document. That's the fair way of doing it. We're not going to try and surprise you with something at the table now that we didn't put in writing, because that's just not fair to you. So hopefully it's all here. So 3s, satisfactory, good baseline, and I don't think that's something that you should be significantly concerned about or overly proud about. It's just, this is where I'm starting, and next year, hopefully these numbers all go up. In terms of recognized strengths, the scores are just a number. I think the comments are much more important, because that's where people did give some specific examples of both the good and the bad. And I get the job of telling you the good. Michelle will tell you the areas that can be improved upon. And numbers are numbers, and even though we tried very hard to try to be consistent among all of us, that will never necessarily happen. That's just human nature. But comments are great sources of feedback, and you got a lot. I will say that I saw some inconsistencies between the scores and the comments, and that's one reason why I think the comments can be more valuable. In particular, you received a score of 2.8 on the subject of budget and financial management. Again, that was the aggregate score of everything that we all submitted. But the only comments you got were, Beth has an excellent control of town budget and great resources, and assistant town manager and comptroller. She clearly articulates the internal process for developing the budget and can show ownership for non-select board municipal members and residents. This will be better reviewed after the current budget cycle. That's a very positive comment, despite the fact that you got 2.8. So, take everything with a grain of salt, but at the same time, please pay attention to everything. So now, just walking through some of the strengths that I thought were obvious themes from everybody's comments. When it comes to the way you support the board, it seemed pretty consistent that you brought engagement, you brought communication, and you had good levels of foresight. That's what you need. And there's really no way of teaching that. So it's a good place to start. When it comes to leadership, again, there were repeated themes that you had strong organization and good oversight over the various departments within the town hall. When it comes to planning, again, there's some overlap here. There's supposed to be. And again, people were commenting on how you're very skilled at managing, you organize your tasks, and you give critical items the necessary focus to make sure they move forward. And that's a good adjective there, critical. That shows prioritization over things. There's more on your plate than anybody in this town could ever possibly imagine. You have to prioritize. It seems pretty clear that we think that you do that and you do it well. Community relations. Here, the positives were good collaboration with other town departments and really well-established groups like ENCA. Problem solving. Lots of feedback that you had strong judgment, that you were good with negotiations, that you were clear and you set a goal and you worked towards it, and that you have many happening at one point in time and you juggle them all as well. The budget issue, I've already commented upon. It was nothing but a positive comment, but a score of 2.8. Sure. Take that as you will. And then your personal, professional, and organizational integrity. I think that was just positive across the board. Lots of comments about you being responsible, fair, honest, and from my perspective, again, those are things that you cannot teach, and they're really hard to put on somebody's resume. But if you didn't have those as a town manager, we'd have a lot more problems. So the fact that you do and that's recognized, I think, is a very important strength from which we can start with everything else. So I think those are the big themes of the positive feedback, and some more background on the scores and how they kind of worked out. And now Michelle can talk about the areas that we can improve
That's
upon.
fine. And I think another thing we should probably commit to as a board next year is probably doing a 360. Because I think what we saw with some of the blanks or NAs, I know I left a few places blank, is we don't have full visibility into everything Beth's doing. And around, managing staff in the building. And I think as we expand this to other stakeholders, maybe other committees and other staff department heads, we'll have other, just more data points. But it didn't seem right to start, having never given Beth a review, with what does everybody else think? We may not even fully understand what it is, but I think we should try to commit to that next year for Beth. So I'll just focus on, I like the way Bill framed personal development goals and operational development goals. So I'm going to start with a couple. I'll just pick off on personal development goals around skills and growth in the role. A couple of themes around networking, conference attendance, maybe finding mentors, but people who are in this role longer than you and doing the work, and leveraging from other communities and other current town managers, former town managers, and finding those opportunities to both network in a formal way and a mentoring way, but even just going to those, dialing into the webinars, or even maybe important, just showing up and showing your face, I think would be good. And if there's some training in that way that you need time off from, let the board know. We're good for that. And then on another kind of, personal area is, being the face of the town, putting yourself out there. You're going to the Jenks, we see that. You were in the Winchester News this week was your face. But I think continuing to be the face of the town in ways that we all are when we get questions about certain things in town. And, where can you be ahead of those questions, or where can you want to proactively be out and sharing that news? So I think that's not networking professionally, but I think just that community involvement and being the face of the town and speaking as the town manager, right? On the operational side, I think one of the comments we had was, additional context for the packet, information for the board. I think there's a lot that comes in your town manager's report. I know you spent a lot of time on that report. I think a question that I have, and I know Bill has on occasion, is what were the previous votes? What's the precedent for this? Like, what have other boards done? And you're not that long in the role to know, maybe. And we've had Patty go back and find votes that are 8 years old. But I think context, which might make your report longer or might make the attachment longer. I'm not sure where that lands, Beth, but I think sometimes that saves us time from saying, are we really like pioneers in this decision, or are we just following a pattern? And I think that would be helpful. So not just the action that's needed, but if there's context that's helpful for us to arrive at, it's new or it's not, and we're just staying the course. And then another area around budget is maybe on the flip side of budget around funding opportunities, not that we're giving away energy for free, that's not on Beth, right? But I appreciated that somebody, thank you whoever did, the $1 million grant for the South Reservoir Dam, I forgot about that. Like, that's real money that we didn't have to spend. So let's, making sure that we're understanding, A, giving you credit for when you're doing it, but also what are the other places where it's either efficiency or funding sources? What else are you doing that maybe we don't know? And what else can you, like, department heads are coming up with ideas, what else can we leverage so that the budget is the budget? I think the revenue assumptions, I went over those, we all went over those in January and questioned things, but what else, where can we push the envelope a little bit? Where can we do a little more? Where can we monetize our investments? And then when it's your turn to speak, if we're missing, like, hey, it was $1 million here and $1 million there, let's make sure we don't, if we're not seeing it, make sure you're telling us about it, or make sure you're taking credit and championing it for yourself. I think there's a level of advocacy for the good work that might be missed if we don't know. So I would say on the operational side, looking at the detail and the context for the packet, for the board to make informed decisions, and just the broader, the efficiencies in town, grants, funding sources, like how come, as we're moving into an operating override conversation, we'll be really looking at the town manager and school committee, like what can we do more of, what can we do less of, what needs to persist? Like that will be a critical piece of this whole state of the town process. So I think that's just, be prepared and come with those ideas. So I'm going to just stop there, and I think those kind of get into goals around, we can decide, attend X number of conferences, identify Y number of funding opportunities or efficiencies, show that you've networked, or who else, like we have peer communities. We always talk about water rates, school systems, like who are the peer communities that Beth's talking to, are of similar sized towns with similar kind of challenges, like who are we learning from? So I think those would be the goals I might focus on, but I'm going to just stop here and see, I'm going to just go to my right and let John weigh in on either forward-looking things. I'd rather not us, I don't want to go back to like 2-year-old stories, but I'll leave it to you.
All right.
That's not,
So Beth,
that's not a comment for you.
this was a good form for me to go through, because I realized I didn't know enough. So I hit it right down the middle on everyone, because I'd be just cherry picking answers, and I didn't think that was fair to you. I also realized we hired the town engineer to be the town manager, and maybe expected her to be a seasoned town manager, and that didn't seem fair. And so, not being the chair, I don't have direct interaction with you, so I'm not really clear on what the message is to you about what our goals are. I have every other Monday night and so forth. So for me, it was more looking forward, saying like, I understand you did a ton of great work in the last 3+ years. But really going forward, how do it benefits our residents, because I'm always working for the residents, to have you be successful.
Absolutely.
And is that a program that includes education and networking and all those other things that Michelle has mentioned? And then how do we provide you with continuous feedback so it's not 11 o'clock on Monday night and we're doing this? Because that's obviously crazy, right? We're doing it because we have not done it before this, so thank you for bringing this no matter where it's good, it had to get done, so we're here now. But to me, it's about looking forward and being constructive, and And saying, and also, if you do not have the resources to get the things done that we need to have done, then you need to feel comfortable with us to reach out and say, I need some assistance, because there's no problem doing that when one doesn't do that and things go sideways. I'm not saying they have, then that's a bigger problem for me. So if I was like a growth, for me, let's use the LDA Amendment 21. Think about that whole project, the number of timelines. And yes, I've got notes in here, but we come in here and we're talking like, hey, this due's on this date, this date, this date, this date. It would be helpful to have a consolidated timeline of all of the goals that we agreed to as a group, and you, because we're going to ask you after these things what we can get done in 2026. And put those on a timeline, and then it's up to you to update us on, hey, this is where we're going. These things are falling off the critical path. Are they still important or not? And that helps guide our activities. Yeah. And then helps the board, when we have whoever the chair is, they get questioned with 100 different people who want to come and see them. But if it's not mission critical, we can only have a certain amount of non-mission critical stuff. To me, that would be a helpful management tool. So that was my approach, my thinking on it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just echo what John says about, we know some of what you do. We see the results of some of what you do. We, hear of negotiations and things. But, as the select board and you're an employee of the select board, it's a different relationship than if we worked in the office together, 40 hours a week, right? And we see that. So I think on some levels it was, challenging to look at this and say, I skipped a number of areas, right? I didn't know. So even to thinking of that as like, what more can you tell us about what you do? Not necessarily from here are my accomplishments, but just to give us the broader scope of like what's happening in your office and what's happening within the town hall. So we also get the bigger picture of what, your day-to-day reality is like. I think, the other, and as Bill said, I'm also happy to share what I provided. One of the challenges, both for you and for the chair, is managing a select board. And so opportunities where there's an opportunity to kind of manage up a little bit and be forward thinking about where, kind of in what John said of, just what was our previous decisions, but being able to just kind of push us a little bit with knowing what we might ask and what the decisions are. And I know I've seen some changes within the packet, even, the past few months that do get to like Bill's request of having more information. John mentioned last week, like we get stuff Sunday night or Monday and don't have the time to read it. So having things printed that came through this afternoon was super helpful. So I do see that when we make a request that those changes are implemented. But, just sort of being able to anticipate where things might be, the longer agenda items, the things that are going to need some more background or some more context so that we can be pushed a little bit to be more efficient, as we say, at 11:10 at night. Another thing that I did provide and is noted in the the $1 million grant for the South Reservoir Dam is also just what are how can we help you, but how can you be creative of what are more opportunities for funding, especially as we get into sort of these critical budget times where we can really think of like, is there wants or needs that somebody can think about, is there something we can go after? And I know, as well, the office is stretched, so. Thank you.
Anything more you're going to add, Bill?
Very
forward. Yeah.
Can I just back up?
Oh, no, go ahead. Sure.
I've seen you operate on this board with us on this board for 3 years, and so I think we have comments from 5 different people coming in different directions, and I do think that they show you've been operating as a town manager, and you've been doing what we anticipate a town manager would do. And there's people who have different styles and backgrounds and personalities, but you're moving things forward and moving things forward as expected.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you are a exceptional town engineer. I think you're a great town manager with a lot of potential. And the difference between those two, to excel in the town manager position, is only going to come through experience. And you started this job at one of the most ridiculous times I could ever possibly imagine, for all sorts of reasons. But you've persevered, and in the less than a year that I've been on this board, I've seen you improve. We have a strong town manager system here. You should be a strong town manager. I don't mean that you should be bullying us around, but you know this town better than we do. We are elected officials, meaning that we are political. You understand things much more in the long run. You understand the nitty-gritty in ways that we cannot. If we are going in the wrong direction and you see problems, you should make sure we understand that right away. I gave the specific example in my feedback about the Mystic School, whereas I learned more about it. Yes, some of that is hindsight, but I feel like you probably could have stepped in more and given some more direction to that sooner, because I think you understood it better than any of us did at that time. So, you know, going forward, please tell us when we're being idiots and you think something really needs to happen. You don't have to use that language. And yes, there's definitely an echo here that I think more information ahead of time is always better. I read every single thing that goes in that packet, and I think it's not necessarily, I don't think it was fair criticism that we have long meetings to put that on your shoulders. I think that is also partially the chair's responsibility, and I told Michelle that.
Yeah, you did.
But, you know, together, you know, we can have a goal of maybe have a meeting where nobody has to ask a question because we've all been fully informed in the packet, and we can get out of here before 11 o'clock at night. And you have access to historical files and everything else that can help make that happen and make us a better board. So there's some specific criticism there, but I think it's also very achievable. So
Thank you.
thank you. And it's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you.
And thanks for the feedback, Bill. I have failed miserably this evening.
I was just saying, I've been watching a lot of Senate hearings, and they have timers. Just go through it.
They do.
Yield back.
I can get one right away.
Baby steps. Mike.
Thank you, Michelle. You know, just at the outset, you know, I think that it was a very good process for us to do, and I know we've committed to a 360 process in the future, but I think as John suggested, we need to be having these conversations on a more regular basis. And so in a way, this is a more truncated operation, but I think it helps. As far as the good stuff, I think, you know, I have a little bit of the benefit and the burden of working with multiple town managers over the years and have certain expectations around things. Just the every other week putting together meetings and information and getting it so we're ready is a lot of work, and I do feel like that is there. And again, you know, it's hard to control whether our meetings are going to be short or long. It's just, you know, who's ever speaking or what. You know, so I think that is very good. It is helpful, I think, for a lot of our projects that do have engineering issues and that you're here that can lead us the way in that. Otherwise, you know, we would be fumbling around with them. So I certainly can't add value to a lot of the technical aspects of it. So and it is a lot of what we do. On the so what I did, you know, for anything that you know I felt like I was going below 3 on, I just wanted to provide some, you know, kind of support for that and just some vignettes of kind of like where I saw some issues just over the years. I tend to work on kind of larger projects, and so it's you know, takes more time. Sometimes they're multi-years, sometimes they're multi-terms, right? So one of the projects that we worked on was the Lynch Solar project. And that was an effort for us to use federal funds and apply the Inflation Reduction Act to putting solar at Lynch and start generating revenue. There seemed to be a kind of ideological opposition from management when Ken had kind of identified that the Inflation Reduction actually would apply to us and would save us 30%. When we started putting the numbers in, management had reduced numbers by 30% to really make it look worse for us, right? And so when we got that information, we finally figured it out. The numbers looked a lot better. So getting the right information there, and I think, you know, keeping some people's ideology out of the board's efforts, especially around sustainability, is important. So I'll be quick going through these. Yeah, and then the transition, I think, to town manager, what we did at one point was we had, when you were the engineer, we split up the position between Stacy Ward, the comptroller, Mark Toogood, the assistant town manager, and you as the interim, and had provided stipends for each of you for that purpose until we hired the town manager. What unfortunately happened is when we did hire you, we were told that all three of you would leave if we didn't keep those stipends in place. After talking to Ms. Ward, she said that was not coming from her. I didn't get the sense it was coming from you. And the board, after having some long conversations, said that we didn't want to extend those stipends. Those were temporary, and once we hired the town manager, that was the goal. For some reason, that those stipends for Mark Toogood were kept in place and accelerated his salary to a level that no assistant town manager in Massachusetts has ever had. And that has real impact on the state retirement board, especially as he's signaled his retirement soon. It really increased his salary by 50% over a couple of years. And we weren't made aware of this. It was where we decided not to rehire somebody in the procurement office, my understanding, and use that salary to pay Mark, who's making close to $250,000, substantially more than you. It was not from the direction of the select board. Really, it was the opposite of what we had voted. Looking back on the Lynch vote, again, these are things that may seem minor, but are important to me. For some reason, we had the select board, not everybody was here at that point, on the day of the Lynch vote on a Saturday, we had an off-camera meeting where management asked us to cut $2 million from the school budget and use it for capital projects. The schools weren't invited and weren't notified about it. And, and I'm glad that the select board voted not to do it, but it was something that seemed in bad spirit. Here we are voting for, it's the day to be celebrating a new school, and we're unilaterally getting recommendation to cut a school budget, which would have absolutely resulted in laying off teachers. So I think before doing things like that, I think there needs to be more consensus from leadership and more discussion with the board rather than things just coming up in an emergency fashion. I can't remember ever having a Saturday meeting like that before, or meetings off camera with something so substantive.
We haven't had any since, though, right? Because I don't think I was on the board then, but we haven't had anything since. Okay.
Are you reviewing Beth's performance over the tenure of her time as town manager?
Well, I think he's comparing it to previous town managers too, I think. Yeah. I mean, Mike does have more history.
Yeah. And so, I'm almost done here. Okay. Last one. And so, and then the other thing was the Mystic School Heat Project. Initially, we responded to that in emergency fashion. We were told that it was $1.5 million. I think we started setting aside some ARPA funds thinking, great, we can solve this whole problem for $1.5 million. and it turned out that there wasn't any research done on that number, and what it came out to was $4.5 million. So we had to really punt. We invested some money in a temporary solution, but there was no strategy to reach that 4.5. There was no real effort to even work with the schools to come up with a strategy around what the future of the building is. We're still going to be dealing with this problem, in years to come, even though we have had a temporary solution. So, I mentioned those several vignettes as not to necessarily be critical, but to say I think I want you to have more confidence in your own decision and your own decisions, and not listen to other people who have different motivations for certain things. And I think when you do that, I think there's nobody better than you. And so I look forward to that building effort going on for the next year and indefinitely. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Beth?
Yeah, no, I appreciate everybody's time and effort that you put into doing these reviews. I know it takes a lot of work, so I do very much appreciate that. I appreciate the feedback that you each provided. I got the packet on Friday afternoon, and I think for me it would make sense if you're all willing to sit down individually with everybody and kind of go through your comments and your concerns, and see the ways in which I can communicate better to the board, and we can achieve the goals that we have to put together for the next year. I think it's partly about prioritization, obviously, as we've talked about, but also, we've kind of gotten away from the more nitty-gritty work plan that I think was done years ago, where there was kind of like a brain dump of projects that the board kind of quarterly might have reviewed. And I think there's some benefit to that, right? So it keeps in everybody's mind fresh of like the universe of projects and problems that we have to work on. So I think maybe getting back to a more regular kind of detailed work plan, not kind of the overarching kind of board's goals that we work on kind of every summer, but like a more critical project list of, and hopefully that will come out of some of the goals that that we talk about for the next year. So again, if you're all willing, I'd like to kind of meet individually with everybody to kind of go through your comments. And I appreciate all the feedback, and I've worked for this community for 20 years. I'm committed to the role of town manager, and look forward to the next year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. And if people can make time to get with Beth between now and the 10th, I mean, I think it could even happen maybe the morning of, but if some goals are kind of coming clear in your mind, the goals can't just be ours. They have to be yours too, right? Or we have to have mutual agreement on them. So as you're having conversations with every one of us, if certain goals are coming up for you, like, yes, because you should commit to this with your own growth objectives and your own goals as well. And then let's see, because I would hope that there's alignment, and hopefully we can come back on the 10th and say, here it is, and here's the goals, and here's what we're going to check in on.
Can I ask just a question of Beth? Is, we gave you, I think we probably each had feedback that was slightly different, and I was just curious how the feedback that we provided to you, did that align with what you thought? Were those kind of in line with how we would you assess yourself similarly? Or is there anything within what we provided that you either, kind of were like, wow, you hit that on the head and we didn't see it before, or that you looked at it and you thought we were at odds with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely areas where you all pointed out that I recognize are areas of growth for me, certainly. And yeah, I mean, there were definitely a few that I thought, like, that doesn't seem to jive with kind of my perception of what happens in town hall, or what is happening within town government. So I think that's the kind of areas where I'd kind of like to talk to everybody. And part of it is communicating all those things that are happening and the things that are going on, and making sure everybody's aware of that, right? And so, being the first year, when we do reviews internally for town staff. There's an accomplishment section. There's a,
Yeah.
there was none of that, right? So as part of future reviews, I think it's important that there's an opportunity to kind of talk about what's been achieved over the past year, right? So it helps kind of jog people's memory of like, oh, we got $1 million, or oh, we checked this thing off the list that we've been.
Oh, we completed a goal because we actually had some, which we will. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
I think the only other thing I would say too is we're discussing budgets and going into an override is for you to tell us if you need more staff as well. It is my impression that we are understaffed in the town manager's office, and it's a hard thing to talk about because everybody wants different, wants to put money into other things, but organizationally, we're going to be a $200 million organization, and a lot of the difficulty with the town manager position is you're just putting out fires every day with things that you don't anticipate. So we can have a work plan and we can have goals.
Yeah.
But, all of a sudden things come out of the woodwork like, the pumping station that needs to be done, right? And then all of a sudden that's the thing for 5 days that you do, that you're focusing on, right? So, I do think we probably are, in a little bit of a need to catch up where we have a lot of people working in the town manager's office and around the town manager's office on a daily basis that are doing too much. So
Definitely something to discuss as we go through the statement.
Yeah. It's harder to justify those positions, so we got to get out there early on those.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beth, for listening to all that, and thanks everybody for taking the time. I think we should have consent agenda, and we can.
Yes, I move that we approve the consent agenda as printed.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Don't forget the pony rides.
Move that we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, WinCam.